Chapter 379. Wang Xianxia and Gu Hanzhan looked in the direction of the warehouse at the same time. The warehouse was very large. The sunlight cast a large shadow around the warehouse. In their sight, there was a huge hole with a diameter of nearly 10 meters in the thick wall. There were dense cracks around the hole, which was the trace of Li Tianlan's body crashing into the warehouse. Wang Xianxia moved his body. When he was about to speak, he spat out another mouthful of blood. His body trembled slightly, as if he was suffering great pain. He injured Li Tianlan with the heaven punishment sword, but Li Tianlan's sword intent in his body also detonated the injury of trying to practice the half-reincarnation for several days in meditation. Wang Xiangxiao's aura suddenly became weak. Wang Xiangxiao felt a little regretful. He felt that he had really overestimated Li Tianlan, or underestimated Gu Qianquan. Even the last invincible realm expert on the holy list was still an invincible realm expert. It should be no problem for him to suppress Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan destroyed one of Gu Qianquan's arms. How good could he be? Wang Xiangxiao decided to practice the half-reincarnation in the last few days of the maneuver because Li Tianlan's extreme strength disturbed his mind and made him instinctively ignore the price Li Tianlan had to pay to do all that. Now it seemed that the price Li Tianlan paid for destroying one of Gu Qianquan's arms was more serious than everyone thought. The treasured cloud silk robe was damaged. Li Tianlan himself was also seriously injured. At this moment, Wang Xiangxiao suddenly questioned himself. If he hadn't practiced the half-reincarnation a few days ago, he wouldn't have participated in the maneuver with serious injuries. In this way, the heaven punishment sword just now would have been more powerful. Would a stronger sword directly take Li Tianlan's life and decide the result of the maneuver without Jianghu and Gu Hanshan's intervention? Wang Xiangxiao raised his arm and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He was injured and couldn't exert all his strength. He was seriously injured by my sword just now. Now he is no longer a threat. Wang Xiangxiao said calmly. The Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City united and turned the triennial event in Jianghu State into an undisguised murder. At this point, no one had a reason to retreat. The firmament in Wang Xiangxiao's hand suddenly shook. He looked at the broken hole in the warehouse wall and said in a calm but firm tone, "So, let's end this quickly." The firmament was dragged on the ground. Wang Xiangxiao held the hilt and rushed forward. The heavy sword's edge rubbed against the ground violently, causing sparks to fly. The sparks then turned into flames. It turned into raging fire, and finally into lightning. Wang Xiangxiao's speed was getting faster and faster. He was sprinting with all his strength. The firmament sword rushed out of the forest, into the flat ground, and rushed to the warehouse. Wherever the huge blade passed, it left a huge ravine that was hundreds of meters long. The lightning was like water, wrapping Wang Xiangxiao up. The waves surged up and down. Extreme softness. Unyielding. Gu Hanzhan followed closely beside Wang Xiangxiao. Compared with Wang Xiangxiao, whose sword was only violent and fierce, his momentum was grander and more gorgeous. One sword wheel after another spun crazily around him. Hundreds of sword shadows whizzed up and down around him. Dark blue lightning spread around Gu Hanzhan. Gu Hanzhan rushed forward, but his feet did not move. His whole body seemed to be stepping on a huge sword shadow. As he rode on the sword, countless sword shadows bloomed around him like a blooming flower. The flower kept blooming, and the lightning kept expanding, but Gu Hanzhan was surrounded by darkness. It was the 9th secluded impasse in the 8th Supreme Sword Dance. Wang Xiangxiao said to end this quickly. Gu Hanzhan had no objection at all. He used his strongest sword at the beginning. The focus of the cooperation between the 3000 World and the Phantom Palace was Li Tianlan. Now, if the young forces owned by several of them combined, except for the credits deducted from the combination of forces, it was almost the same as the credits of the East Emperor Palace. Once Li Tianlan died, several young forces would merge and completely block all the paths of the East Emperor Palace, which could be regarded as cutting off the last hope of the Li family. But it was also crucial whether the merged forces were led by Kunlun City or the Wang family of Beihai. The ownership of dominance also depended on the result of this maneuver. Once Li Tianlan died, the competition between the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City would come next. In this way, it would be more like the final team maneuver. Gu Hanzhan was clear about this, but at this time, he spared no effort and did not intend to take advantage of Wang Xiangxiao at all. This time, the two sides joined hands to deal with Li Tianlan, which meant that they had bet on the future reputation of Wang Xianxia and Gu Hanzhan. On such an occasion, competition was competition. There was no calculation or conspiracy. The two rushed all the way forward. In the woods, a large number of elites brought by Gu Hanzhan had begun to form a formation. The sword formation of Kunlun City was not as extremely overbearing as the Heaven Punishment sword formation, but it was more complicated and delicate. This sword formation did not need an absolutely strong core, but a balance in all aspects. Therefore, there were more people in this sword formation, and its momentum was more terrifying. This formation might not be able to punish the sky, but it was enough to kill. The final hit formation. Boom! Wang Xianxiao and Gu Hanzhan were extremely fast. However, there was someone faster than the two of them, and the distance between them was also shorter. When the two had just rushed half the distance, a roar suddenly sounded on the side of the teaching building near the warehouse. A huge force surged in the teaching building and directly collapsed one side of the building. The dazzling and dangerous lightning surged in the collapsed building. Jiang Shangyu's figure rushed out of the teaching building and directly smashed into the warehouse. His figure stretched to the extreme in the sky, and tens of thousands of thunderbolts burst out with him as the center. Jiang Shangyu's expression was dignified and solemn. He had no sword in his hand. Looking at the warehouse that was getting closer and closer, he directly raised his fist. This was a unique skill that belonged to his family. Thousands of miles of rivers and mountains. The lightning was mighty, and Jiang Shangyu's figure fell at the same time. Jiang Shangyu did not hold back at all. He and Li Tianlan had cooperation. But the premise of all cooperation was that Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu could survive this maneuver. In the whole Jianghu state and the world, countless people's eyes were focused on this maneuver area at this time, including the eyes of at least several invincible realm experts. Among them were Zhongzhou State's Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong and Zhongzhou State's God of War Gu Xingyun. Jiang Shangyu punched at the closest distance. How could he hold back? How could he dare to hold back? The frenzied and violent thunderbolts rushed out of the teaching building and smashed the roof of the warehouse immediately. Jiang Shangyu's figure rushed into the warehouse. In an instant, all the thunderbolts around him completely burst out in the most ferocious way. The light with the meaning of destruction turned into a shock wave, sweeping the entire warehouse. The warehouse was full of chaotic and dangerous light. Jiang Shangyu punched out, and the second punch condensed again. The martial arts of the Jiang family only had a pair of iron fists, without sword intent. But in the countless thunderbolts scattered by his punch, he clearly noticed that there was a weak sword energy behind him. Jiang Shangyu's eyes hesitated, then he suddenly turned around and punched with all his strength again. Picturesque landscape. The violent fist wind raised crazy thunderbolts, and Jiang Shangyu's whole body was full of light. He saw Li Tianlan. But, in the twinkling of an eye, Jiang Shangyu's hair stood on end. The picturesque landscape had already been blasted out uncontrollably, with Jiang Shangyu's voice somewhat distorted because of extreme shock. You! Bang! Similarly, a fist directly hit Jiang Shangyu's fist. Wang Xianxiao and Gu Hanzhan approached the warehouse almost at the same time. A hoarse and fearful roar suddenly came from the warehouse. The whole warehouse kept shaking and swaying under the extreme force. Countless cracks continued to spread on the warehouse's walls. As soon as Wang Xianxiao and Gu Hanzhan stepped into the warehouse, the power in the warehouse suddenly broke out. Boom! There seemed to be a wild thunder in the whole warehouse. The tall and heavy warehouse completely collapsed in an instant in everyone's sight. Huge stones and messy steel bars flew in all directions, and the whole warehouse directly disappeared from everyone's sight. Endless lightning surged out from the collapsed warehouse, bringing with it a blazing white flame that burned everything. Jiang Shangyu's figure was blasted into the teaching building at a speed faster than when he fell. Li Tianlan, whose eyes were red and covered in blood, was almost evil at this time. In the eyes of Gu Hanzhan and Wang Xianxiao, it seemed to be madness at the end of the road, but it was also extremely dangerous and silent. Li Tianlan's figure rushed into the teaching building after Jiang Shangyu. In the sky full of thunderbolts and flames, his body was like a scarlet shadow. Save him! Gu Hanzhan and Wang Xianxiao said at the same time. For both the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City, the Jiang family in Beijiang was valuable enough to rope in. If they could get Jiang Shangyu's loyalty, even if they entered the peak of the divine list in the future, Jiang Shangyu would be their best right-hand man. Such a person was much more valuable than Chen Moxue. How could they not save him? Their figures flashed at the same time, broke through the diffusing flames and thunderbolts, and rushed into the teaching building. Li Tianlan was completely crazy. The thunderbolts and flames seemed to be completely integrated in his hands. He was covered in blood, but his whole body was full of blazing white light. The whole teaching building was shaking. In the space on the third floor, Li Tianlan madly chased after Xianxia, who was fleeing desperately. There was no word to describe the kind of madness and wildness that made people's scalps numb. Walls, tables and chairs, glass, blackboard, stairs. Everything was completely broken in Li Tianlan's attack. Nothing could stand between him and Xianxia for even a second. Xianxia desperately parried, sweeping his legs, elbows, knees, and hooks. The flowing blazing white light burst out with Li Tianlan's every move, and the whole teaching building kept shaking in his attack. In this state, Li Tianlan simply ignored everything. Xianxia was already covered in blood, but he was pulled over and thrown out by Li Tianlan again and again. This was no longer a battle. It was a brutal killing. A naked brutal killing. The firmament sword was raised in an instant. Sweeping. The thunderbolts, which were like water light, suddenly became extremely fierce and violent. The light was everywhere, and there was no fluctuation. A large light curtain swept toward Li Tianlan in an instant. The sword wheel around Gu Hanzhan was fully released, and countless sword shadows extended to the limit. The pseudo-domain of the ninth secluded impasse directly shrouded Li Tianlan with Wang Shengxiao's thunderbolts. Li Tianlan seemed to have completely lost his mind. He suddenly turned around and directly gave up on Xianxia. With red eyes, he directly pounced on Gu Hanzhan. In an instant, Li Tianlan was completely shrouded in the ninth secluded impasse. But ninth secluded impasse was not dark. Instead, there was white light everywhere. 21st blade, shatter of land. Shatter of land. Shatter of land. The completely violent sword energy rushed through the light curtain brought by the firmament sword and shattered the pseudo-domain of the ninth secluded impasse. Covered in blood, Li Tianlan almost instantly arrived in front of Gu Hanzhan, who was the only one who was still in his peak state. Countless bloodstains flowed on his body. Li Tianlan suddenly grabbed Gu Hanzhan's shoulders with both hands and pressed down. Boom! The ground on the third floor of the teaching building suddenly collapsed. Li Tianlan directly pressed Gu Hanzhan into a classroom on the second floor. Gu Hanzhan's face was livid, and the sword shadows kept flashing all over him. 7 unique flowing lights. Like a stream of flowing light, he directly rushed out of the classroom along the nearest distance. Bang! With a dull sound, Li Tianlan directly smashed the wall. Once again, he grabbed Gu Hanzhan's neck. With a messy sound, the young master of Kunlun City was smashed into another classroom in an extremely embarrassing manner. Countless attacks fell on Gu Hanzhan like crazy. Just like when he chased after Xianxia, the classrooms were completely smashed one after another. Attack, attack, attack. White light lingered in every inch of space and kept bursting around Li Tianlan. Gu Hanzhan, who was completely covered in dust, twisted his face and suddenly shouted angrily, "Get lost!" 5 elements annihilation. 5 sword intents that he had accumulated for a long time surrounded Li Tianlan and fell fiercely. Go to hell! With a ferocious face, Gu Hanzhan broke out with all his strength. The 8th supreme sword move suddenly rotated and chopped around Li Tianlan. The 9th secluded impasse covered everything, and the 3 elements annihilation took shape in the darkness. A dense sword shadow rushed directly into the 9th secluded impasse along with the sword shadow. At the same time as the sword shadow rushed into the pseudo-domain, there was also a majestic thunderbolt. Jianghu and Wang Shengxiao appeared here at the same time. The moment Li Tianlan was shrouded in the pseudo-domain, they attacked mercilessly. Gu Hanzhan's face was gloomy and cold. A dagger slowly slid down his cuff. The thunderbolt spread quickly on the blade of the broken sword. Pseudo-domain, sword shadow, thunderbolt. Everything kept exploding around Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan trembled violently all over. Gu Hanzhan sneered, raised his hand, and directly threw out the dagger in his hand. The thunderbolt of the dagger bloomed in the pseudo-domain. The 9th secluded impasse suddenly exploded. More blood sprinkled down in a mess of light and shadow. The crumbling teaching building was completely quiet. When the light dissipated, When the dust settled, everyone saw the final result of this sword strike. Li Tianlan, who was known as the heavenly son of Jianghu state, twitched all over. Under the siege of 3 people, Gu Hanshan's last sword pierced through his abdomen. The dagger drove his body and nailed him to the wall. There was an uproar in the number 3 stand. No one was surprised. Almost all of them only had doubts on their faces. There was some commotion in the 40,000 troops. But Dongqing Wudi was still expressionless. An old patriarch of a wealthy and powerful family in the southeast slowly walked to the front of the stand and sat down. He said with a smile, "Little Han, I heard that you invested a lot of money in the East Emperor Palace?" "Yes, a lot." Han Donglu, the founder of the Flourishing Age Fund, sat in the same row as Wang Tianzong and others and smiled gently. The old patriarch sneered, looking at the financial tycoon who almost suffocated him in his own base camp, and said sarcastically, "You also have a time when your investment fails? That's rare. I have investments in the 3000 world and phantom world. I will earn them back." Han Donglu was calm and collected. "But you supported Li Tianlan. That means you offended His Majesty Sword Emperor and Gu Xingyun." The old patriarch patted Han Donglu on the shoulder and said meaningfully, "When Li Tianlan dies, you won't get anything from the layout of the special warfare system for the next few decades. The money you invested in the East Emperor Palace will be wasted." "What if Li Tianlan doesn't die?" Han Donglu asked indifferently. The old patriarch subconsciously glanced at Li Tianlan, who was nailed to the wall, and said disdainfully, "Is it possible? If Tianzong and Xingyun are as narrow-minded as you, the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City don't need to develop. My investment in the East Emperor Palace is a normal investment. If I fail, I will lose a little. If he really wins, it will be a big profit." Han Donglu's tone was indifferent. "Win?" The old patriarch sneered. "How can that boy win?" Han Donglu looked at Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun, who were a few seats away. In his sight, Gu Xingyun's face became more and more gloomy. But the Sword Emperor of Jianghu State had closed his eyes. Han Donglu glanced at the old patriarch and gently raised the corner of his mouth. "Ha! Those who think Tianlan is a little weak, don't worry." Chapter 380. No one could have imagined such a scene. Before the maneuver began, no one, including Wang Xianxia, Gu Hanshan, and Jiang Shangyu, expected that Li Tianlan, who was already the strongest of the young generation in Jianghu State, would be nailed to the wall by a sword. They never underestimated their strength, especially Wang Xianxia and Gu Hanshan. One had wind and thunder veins, and the other had heavenly king heart. They had the best physical quality, the most perfect training breakthrough, and the most powerful inheritance. All of these could make them break out the combat capability far beyond the same realm. Both of them were at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, but they were already qualified to look down on a considerable number of superiors of the half-step invincible realm. Jiang Shangyu's reputation was not as good as the first two, but in everyone's mind, he was not a weakling either. He had been in the half-step thunder-shocking realm for 3 years and broke through to the stabilization phase of the thunder-shocking realm, which was enough to show that his potential was equally strong. If the 3 of them joined forces, they could even fight against Li Tianlan, who had the combat capability of the invincible realm. Furthermore, they had also prepared 2 sword formations that were equally powerful. All of this was well prepared, which showed the absolute importance they attached to Li Tianlan. In this maneuver, both Gu Hanshan and Wang Xianxia were ready to pay a great price, and they were even ready to stagnate in their martial arts realm for a few years. Li Tianlan was extremely powerful. They weren't weak either. Comparing the strength of both sides, they had at least a 50 to 60% chance of winning. This was enough for them to make up their minds to participate in this exercise. But they didn't expect everything to go so smoothly. Without the protection of the cloud silk robe, Li Tianlan was not at his peak. In this state, Li Tianlan still caused them a lot of losses and troubles in all the victories. But compared with their expectations, such losses and troubles were much smaller. Wang Xianxia was seriously injured. Both Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu had internal injuries of varying degrees. But Li Tianlan was nailed to the wall by Gu Hanshan's sword. All the tables and chairs in the classroom had been completely smashed, and the walls had collapsed, bringing up a large amount of dust. Dust fell and rose again. Countless ashes fell on Li Tianlan, who was covered in blood. The short sword thrown by Gu Hanshan was still shaking. Li Tianlan's body seemed to be suffering great pain, twitching slightly with the vibration of the dagger. Dust and blood covered his body. Li Tianlan was very dirty and looked extremely embarrassed. This was the Li family's last hope. They were the enemies most likely to threaten the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City in the next few decades. He was the heavenly son of Jianghu state. But now, the prodigy was nailed to the wall, covered in dirt and dust. He looked so pitiful, so petty, so weak. Wang Xianxia remained calm. Jianghu remained calm. Gu Hanshan's expression was calm, but there was a kind of undisguised cruelty and coldness in his eyes. The combat capability of the invincible realm at the age of 22. This was the biggest shadow that shrouded their hearts, and it almost made them despair. But now, the shadow that made them feel the most despair was pinned in front of them, heavily injured and on the verge of death. The shadow in his heart was gradually fading. The three of them seemed to have become purer and purer. Vaguely, Wang Xianxiao saw his way to the half-step invincible realm. Gu Hanshan and Jianghu also gained something. Thank you. Wang Xianxiao broke the silence. He looked at Li Tianlan and said in a simple and calm tone. He looked at Li Tianlan. This was the young man of the same generation that he admired and even respected the most. They won the exercise. But Wang Xianxiao didn't feel happy. He felt a little regretful. But he would not regret it. Li Tianlan might not have died here. But Wang Xianxiao knew that he had no choice. His hands and shoulders shouldered not only the firmament, but also the Wang family of Beihai. In the months to come, he would have to experience too many involuntary and unwilling situations. But he would no longer have a choice. Li Tianlan's eyes gradually dimmed. Wang Xianxiao looked at him silently. He wanted to say a lot, but he didn't want to say anything. At this moment, it seemed that whatever he said would be a mockery. But there was only respect in Wang Xianxiao's heart. He looked at him quietly, and his eyes were a little bleak. It's all thanks to you that I can gain something today. Gu Hanshan looked at Li Tianlan. The cruelty and coldness in his eyes gradually turned into a somewhat twisted smile. Go in peace. He said, Jianghu state will have me and the Gu family in the future. We don't need the glory of the Li family. The corners of his mouth couldn't help curling up, and his killing intent was awe-inspiring. It seemed that everyone had forgotten. The young man who was nailed to the wall by him was the 9th on the world divine list. This ranking might be exaggerated, but Li Tianlan's name had always been on the divine list. Today, he nailed an expert on the divine list to the wall. Gu Hanshan's eyes were a little ferocious. He glanced at Wang Xianxiao and then at Jianghu. Jianghu shrugged and didn't speak. I'll do it. Gu Hanshan's eyes fell on Wang Xianxiao again. His meaning was clear. He wanted to send Li Tianlan to hell in person. Whatever. Wang Xianxiao was a little dispirited. Gu Hanshan walked over slowly. Li Tianlan's eyes grew dimmer. The scarlet in his eyes gradually faded, and his black eyeballs gradually expanded. After the scarlet color disappeared, Li Tianlan's eyes instantly became dark, and no white could be seen. In Gu Hanshan's perception, Li Tianlan's vitality was rapidly fading. But a sword intent suddenly rose in the classroom. He suddenly reached out and held the dagger nailed to him. His eyes were still dim. His life was still passing. His aura was still weakening. All the glory and hope of the Li family seemed to have completely gone to the bottom after a short period of madness. Li Tianlan directly pulled out the dagger. Blood gushed out. His body fell to the ground. The moment his aura was extremely weak, the sword intent that suddenly rose in the classroom suddenly became extremely violent. Watch out! Jianghu and Wang Xianxiao's faces changed dramatically, and they roared in unison. Without any hesitation, the two of them directly took action. Li Tianlan held the dagger and stood up straight. His eyes were pitch black, with an indescribable silence and darkness. All his vitality seemed to be transformed into the most violent sword intent by him in the blink of an eye. The blazing white flame and the wild thunder surged without warning with Li Tianlan as the center. The sword intent swept through the air. The whole space twisted violently. A storm suddenly rose in the whole teaching building, overturning the mess in the classroom and lifting the ceiling. The blazing white fire raged wildly in the wind in an instant, but the lightning suddenly condensed in one place. Li Tianlan raised the dagger. The blazing white lightning kept jumping around the dagger, and then instantly turned into the most dazzling blue. Everything happened too fast. Li Tianlan just raised the dagger. The sword energy seemed to reach its peak directly without any short accumulation. The shining blue lightning was completely filled by the sword energy, and it continued to expand in the blazing white fire. The sword energy was mighty. It was not sharp, not sinister. There was only an irresistible strength and majesty. The Wang family of Beihai, sword of Emperor Path. The fire was like a raging wave. The lightning entwined with the sword energy followed the fire closely, and almost instantly rushed to Gu Hanshan. Gu Hanshan's reaction was not slow at all. Li Tianlan had begun to retreat as soon as he raised the dagger in his hand. A large expanse of sword light wandered around him, and sword wheels rose up and surrounded Gu Hanshan. This was pure defense and retreat. The condensed sword of Emperor Path suddenly exploded in the thunder and fire. Gu Hanshan, who retreated in a hurry, and Wang Xianxia and Jianghu, who acted in a hurry, were directly shrouded by the sword intent. The storm that arose out of nowhere raged fiercely. The sword light of Emperor Path shone more brightly, and the sword light was surging, crazily suppressing Wang Xianxia and the other two who were in a passive position. Boom! The teaching building shook completely, and dense cracks almost covered the entire staircase. The sword intent of Emperor Path broke out, directly smashing Wang Xianxia and the other two from the second floor to the first floor. Li Tianlan's pitch-black pupils were completely on fire. His eyes were dim, but the crazy scarlet once again covered his eyes. His pupils had completely turned into a daunting dark red. The sword energy had not yet dissipated. At the same second when Wang Xianxia and the other two fell, Li Tianlan rushed down without hesitation. In front of stand number 3. On the huge screen, the picture suddenly froze for a moment. Li Tianlan and the other two completely disappeared from the picture. Only the cracked wall appeared on the screen. The wall was snow-white. Only a sword mark was carved there. When a considerable number of people were a little confused, Xianxia, who did not appear in the stand but stood in another corner and looked at the big screen, suddenly looked extremely gloomy. She held the long sword in her hand tightly. After hesitating for a moment, the woman who had already given up rushed to the maneuver area without hesitation. The picture on the big screen froze for 5 seconds. Then it became light that filled the whole screen. Chaos. The whole screen seemed to be shaking in the loud roar. The blazing fire, the violent thunder, the bone-chilling ice, the messy storm, and the pervading smoke and dust merged into an extremely chaotic light and shadow. Light and shadow covered everyone's sight. Indistinctly, a few blurry shadows entangled with each other in the extremely chaotic light. Crazy. Everyone was fighting crazily. Wherever the 4 figures passed by, there was destruction everywhere. It was destruction, it was killing, and it was a fight to the death. Sword chi, iron fists, all the unique skills, and all the martial arts had become the most lethal killing moves. The figures on the screen kept moving, and the cameras dimmed one after another. However, the whole battlefield became more and more desperate. The light and shadow gradually dimmed, but the sword energy became more and more violent. The majestic sword completely tore the space, and all the pictures became blurred. Vaguely, a figure covered in blood was attacking the 3 opponents in front of him without any regard for anything else. There was no reason, no thought. Only fighting. That was giving up all the violence, with hysterical killing intent. There was no defense, only attack. The dagger of Kunlun City returned to Gu Hanshan's hand. The heavy iron fist. The cold dagger. The huge blade fell on Li Tianlan again and again, and blood kept falling. Li Tianlan didn't dodge at all and took all the opponent's counterattack head-on. Crazy attack. Howl continued to attack madly. The dagger stabbed into Li Tianlan's body several times. The iron fist hit Li Tianlan's body countless times. The heavy blade of firmament whistled wildly and chopped toward Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan didn't care at all, no matter how serious the injury was. Fighting and attacking had become his instinct. He wouldn't stop until he died. In the blurred picture, several people fought from the first floor to the top, and from the top to the bottom. In the suffocating silence, both sides kept bleeding. Li Tianlan's injury was getting worse, but his combat capability didn't decrease at all. Everyone was staring at the picture on the screen, staring at the outcome that might be decided at any second. The heavy sword of firmament rose again with a violent trajectory, and the whole space trembled with the blade. Wang Xianxia completely changed. He seemed to become as crazy as Li Tianlan. The majestic sword energy wrapped the huge sword, and he chopped toward Li Tianlan again and again. Li Tianlan didn't dodge. The wonderful body movements and the mysterious shadow formula had all disappeared from his body. Only the 24 moves of swordsmanship remained. In the face of the 3 strongest young experts in Jianghu state except for himself, he had the attitude that he would fight to the end even if he died. Kill, kill, kill! Wang Xiangxiao's eyes suddenly became extremely frenzied. The heavy and huge sword edge suddenly raised a sword intent that ignored everything. He held the giant sword with both hands, disregarding his own injury, and chopped down with all his strength. The Wang family of Beihai, the domineering sword. It was pure domineering, conceited, and disdainful of everything. The sword intent didn't fluctuate at all. The moment it appeared, it became completely crazy. Boom! The teaching building, which had stood here for many years, finally exploded into pieces under the raging sword qi. This was the most thorough collapse. First, the foundation of the first floor was completely loose. The stone pillars supporting the stairs were shattered. Countless boulders flew out and collapsed from the bottom to the top. The second floor, the third floor. In the smoke and dust all over the sky, the whole teaching building collapsed layer by layer in the raging sword intent. The almost overwhelming ruins smashed down, as if to completely bury the 4 people inside. Li Tianlan's attack instinctively paused. 9th secluded impasse. The moment the smoke and dust rose, Jiang Shangyu, whose face was pale, suddenly roared at the top of his voice. Gu Hanzhan froze for a moment, and then understood that this was Jiang Shangyu's reminder to him. Without any hesitation, Gu Hanzhan unreservedly opened the pseudo-domain that he could barely master now, covering his 2 teammates and Li Tianlan. The sound of collapse seemed to go far away at the moment when the pseudo-domain was opened. Jiang Shangyu was in the air, and his whole body was completely stretched out in the darkness. His arms, legs and waist. All the power was fully mobilized by him in the shortest time. The dense sounds of joints cracking kept ringing in Jiang Shangyu's body. Jiang Shangyu's body began to glow. The light was not dazzling, nor was it blue. It was extremely faint, but absolutely distant. Jiang Shangyu raised his arm. His movements were extremely clear, but they were extremely fast. The sound of all the joints was still ringing in his body, and his punch had directly blasted down without reservation. This was the iron fist of the Jiang family. But it had surpassed the unique skill of the Jiang family. He had been in the half-step thundershocking realm for 3 years. Jiang Shangyu's martial arts did not move. He seemed to have done nothing, but he had done too much and gained too much. This punch was the strongest move that concentrated all of Jiang Shangyu's essence, qi, and spirit. His own killing move. 10,000 miles of starry sky. The wind of the fist carried an invisible power, vast and mighty. The faint light kept spreading along the trajectory of his attack, and instantly lit up the entire pseudo-domain. The dark pseudo-domain was not in the dark. The sky was full of stars. At this moment, it was not only the number 3 stand that caused a sensation. All over Jianghu state, and even all the major forces in the world, all the people who saw this scene were suddenly shocked. In this maneuver, they finally saw what they wanted to see. Maybe this was not what they wanted to see the most, but it was definitely the most valuable. Jiang Shangyu's punch alone made countless people feel that this trip was worthwhile. Because this was Jiang Shangyu's own martial arts. It was completely his own martial arts, which was most suitable for him. When Wang Xiangxiao and Gu Hanzhan were exploring their own road to the invincible realm with the help of the top inheritance. Without the top inheritance, Jiang Shangyu had been dormant for 3 years, and finally embarked on the most suitable and correct path for him. Few people knew that he actually had the heavenly king heart. But so what if they didn't know? At this moment, Jiang Shangyu was a real young heavenly son. Because he had his own path. As long as he kept going, the end of this path would definitely be the invincible realm. Wang Xiangxiao had the wind and thunder veins. Gu Hanzhan had the heavenly king heart. As long as they grew up, they would definitely enter the invincible realm in the future. And now Jiang Shangyu was the same. The starry sky. This punch was heavy and grand, and of course, it was as vast and amazing as the starry sky. The wind of the fist rushed into the pseudo-domain with great power. The stars lit up one after another. In silence, a huge sword edge lit up in the pseudo-domain. It was the purest light. There was only one point, but it was as vast as the sun and the moon. The point of light lay between the darkness and the stars, floating forward. It was so natural, so clear, but so dreamy and solemn. Heavenly Sword. It was not the heavenly sword of the Wang family of Beihai. It was the heavenly sword that belonged to Wang Xianxia himself. He also found his own path. Although it was only a starting point, it also broke the inherent inheritance of the Wang family of Beihai. It was the most dreamy and dazzling light. It was solemn, vast, and unparalleled. Ninth Secluded Impasse. The Starry Sky. Heavenly Sword. At the moment when the teaching building collapsed, the three young heavenly sons made their most powerful attacks and their strongest trump cards at the same time. And the target was Li Tianlan. The wind of the fist was mighty all the way. The stars kept shining. Every ray of starlight was a bolt of lightning. Thousands of thunderbolts bloomed at the same time. And the sacred and solemn sword light of the heavenly sword suddenly spread. The pseudo-domain of the ninth secluded impasse began to twist wildly. There was no amazing destructive power. There was no huge momentum. Everything was silent. But the twisted ninth secluded impasse became darker and quieter. In the absolute silence, there were swords and starlight in the pseudo-domain. This was the real domain. The real domain of the invincible realm. The joint attack of the three finally broke through the limit of the thundershocking realm and went straight into the invincible realm, forming the most authentic domain of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan was wrapped in the domain of the invincible realm. He was motionless. He let the starlight fall on him. He let the edge of the heavenly sword pass through his chest. He let the ninth secluded impasse twist and squeeze his body. Bang! His arms were completely blown up in the frenzy of attacks. His arms disappeared. His legs were shattered. His whole body was completely torn into countless pieces. In front of the number 3 stand of the Sky Academy, the forces belonging to the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City had begun to cheer. Wang Tianzong opened his eyes and looked at Gu Xingyun for a moment. Both of them saw a touch of gloomy killing intent in each other's eyes. And near the two, Han Donglu, the founder of Huiting Flourishing Age Fund, had taken out his mobile phone and dialed a number. "Help me draw up an investment contract." After the phone was connected, he said with a chuckle in the cheers. "Okay, Boss Han." On the phone, the staff of the Flourishing Age Fund answered, "What kind of investment is it? How much is it?" "The investment of the Special Warfare System." "The amount?" Han Donglu thought for a moment and said, 10 billion. This, even with the scale of the Flourishing Age Fund, such a huge investment still made the staff on the other side hesitate for a while. But she did not express any objection and just said cautiously, "Okay, Boss Han, which institution is the investment in?" Han Donglu narrowed his eyes and gave his answer with a smile. "East Emperor Palace." Mount Dibbing. Emperor Hall. Qin Weibai and Summer Solstice sat opposite each other, like two perfect goddesses, holy, cold, and inviolable. The stack of documents was placed on the tea table between them. A screen was set up in the hall of Emperor Hall. Two perfect women, who were similar in some aspects but not exactly the same, looked at the screen quietly. On the screen was the live broadcast of the final maneuver of the Sky Academy. Qin Weibai watched Li Tianlan's body being completely torn into powder in the real invincible realm. Her eyes were bright and dreamy, and the corners of her mouth were gently raised. She was smiling. For the first time in many years, she smiled so brightly and so happily. That was a kind of undisguised ostentatiousness. She laughed out loud, and the crisp laughter kept echoing in Emperor Hall. "Is it funny?" Summer Solstice looked at Qin Weibai expressionlessly and said coldly, "This is the funniest thing I've ever seen." "Ha, giggle, oh, ha. Qin Weibai laughed and bent down. A killing intent flashed in Summer Solstice's eyes. But not to Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai seemed to feel Summer Solstice's killing intent. She paused and said with a smile, "Jealousy is the original sin. You are all guilty. What about you?" Summer Solstice sneered and stared at Qin Weibai's eyes, showing her sharpness. "Me?" Qin Weibai laughed at herself and said, "I am unforgivable." Federal City of Star State. The White House. President Li Huaqing of Jianghu State, who had been visiting Star State in recent days, was also watching the maneuver. He saw the 3 young chosen ones attacking with all their might. He also saw the bodies of the real chosen ones being completely torn apart. President Li Huaqing, who had been tense the whole time, had a smile on his face, and he seemed to be relieved. It's over. He turned around and looked at a middle-aged man in a black suit beside him with a clear smile. The middle-aged man nodded and said, "President, when will you return home?" "I have to finish the work at hand." Li Huaqing smiled and said, "Tonight. We will return home overnight." South America. Indian Federation. In a luxurious manner comparable to the presidential mansion, the second master of the Jiang family of South America, Jiang Qianyan, who had the strength of the invincible realm but had civilized the dark world by stratagem, was also watching the final maneuver. Beside him stood a young man about 30 years old. The young man stared at the screen with a dignified look in his eyes. "I didn't expect him to go this far." Jiang Qianyan sighed softly. "This man is determined and has become enemies with the Jiang family of South America. Are you sure you can kill him?" The young man beside Jiang Qianyan was silent for a while, then slowly shook his head. "It's hard. But I will try." Europe. Fog capital. In the ancient and huge castle complex, a pair of white brother and sister, who could be said to be the most powerful in Europe, were also watching the final maneuver of Jianghu State. The man was tall and straight, handsome, meticulous, and had a pair of pure blue eyes that seemed to contain a peaceful wisdom and tranquility, in addition to the depth of his deep blue eyes. Compared with the man, the woman in the golden dress beside him was extremely languid. This was a woman who was powerful enough to make people not dare to guess her age by appearance alone. Mature, coquettish, seductive, and lazy. Yet, there was an invisible sharpness that could take one's soul away. She looked more like a mixed race, with black hair and a slender figure. The most attractive thing was her eyes. They were the purest and most dazzling golden pupils, not pale gold, but the purest gold, deep and quiet. She lay on the sofa and watched the maneuver quietly. Suddenly, she chuckled and said, "Is this the little guy supported by Samsara Palace and the Lin clan? I'm afraid Tianzong is going to have a headache. No wonder he contacted me a few days ago to borrow the murderous weapon. I don't know if he wants to deal with this little guy or the Lin clan and Samsara Palace. Neither of them is easy to deal with." She spoke in perfect Chinese. "You want to lend it to her?" The man beside her raised his eyebrows, his voice gentle and calm. "I can't say no to that man." The woman giggled, not frivolous but enchanting. She suddenly thought of something. "Do we have a lot of cooperation with the Lin clan?" "I won't interfere with your decision. And you don't want to interfere with the family business. Business is business. I have a pleasant cooperation with the Lin clan." The man shook his head with a smile. "It's boring. I don't care about your business. Tianzong didn't ask me to do anything." The woman curled her rosy little mouth. "You and Tianzong," the man hesitated a little and finally said, "we haven't contacted each other for many years, right? Or can't let it go?" "Why should I let it go?" the woman asked faintly. The man sighed softly and shook his head. "You have no chance. All Tianzong's attention is on summer solstice. You should have known that it would end like this. What chance do you have?" The woman frowned. "Summer solstice is also. Then you have no chance." The man's tone was firm. The woman suddenly sat up and screamed angrily, "William, you're meddling too much." She was neither ugly nor sweet when she was angry, only a kind of frightening majesty. "I'm your brother." William shrugged. "So is Wang Tianzong." "You're my brother." The woman laughed. "But Tianzong. Our grandfather's 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 father and Tianzong's ancestors were brothers. Their relationship is so far away that he is not my brother. I want him to be my man." William looked confused. The string of tongue-twister grandfather represented a distant enough blood relationship, but it also made him confused. "My Chinese is not very good." William smiled bitterly. "All right." The woman shrugged. "I mean, my business has nothing to do with you." William whistled. "Then you can lend him the murderous weapon, or you can go and help him in person. The murderous weapon is already on the way. As for me, I have my own business." The woman shook her head. Have lunch with me at noon. I have a guest at noon. William looked at his watch with some embarrassment. The woman raised her eyebrows. I'm going to have lunch with the Queen. William looked helpless. The Queen. In the knowledge of most Englishmen, there was naturally only one Queen. I'm also the Queen, okay? The woman said angrily. William laughed and said nothing more. The woman put on her high heels and turned directly. I'm leaving. William waved his hand casually and did not get up to see her off. He just watched his sister leave. He did not lie. He did have lunch with the Queen of England at noon. But his sister did not lie either. She was indeed the Queen. One was the Queen of England. And she was the Queen of the entire Europe. The Queen of Shadows of the Shadow Throne. A super dark force in Europe. Grand Duke Irene King Tong Wang Rothschild. William thought of the murderous weapon that was about to reach the Wang family of Beihai, and his eyes refocused on the maneuver on the screen. What followed was destined to be a picture that some people wanted to see, but some people did not want to see. He thought of the Sword Emperor of Jianghu State. He suddenly felt a little funny. In every corner of the world, people were paying attention to the maneuver of Jianghu State and Li Tianlan. Wang Xianxia, Gu Hanzhan, and Jiang Shangyu were also watching Li Tianlan. The real invincible domain was constantly twisting. Li Tianlan's body was torn into pieces. After the strongest blow, the aura of the three people continued to weaken. But Gu Hanzhan, who controlled the ninth secluded impasse to tear Li Tianlan, was laughing. He laughed wildly and proudly. The old enemy who had been pressing on his heart since he appeared was dead. There would be no Li family in Jianghu State in the future. Only Kunlun City. How could he not laugh? The wild laughter became louder and sharper. Gu Hanshan's face was distorted, and he did not hide his laughter. Jiang Shangyu was silent. Wang Xiangxiao was silent. He quietly watched Li Tianlan's body being torn apart little by little in his sight, and he suddenly felt a little melancholy and confused. Sizzle. A subtle sound suddenly fell into Wang Xiangxiao's ears. Wang Xiangxiao froze for a moment. Sizzle. The sound continued to ring, and it was extremely clear in Gu Hanshan's arrogant laughter. It was as if someone had used their hands to gently tear apart a piece of paper or a dry leaf. It was gentle yet cruel. Li Tianlan's body continued to shatter in the domain. But Wang Xiangxiao suddenly raised his head and stared at Li Tianlan in the shattering. Gu Hanshan's laughter also disappeared. Jiang Shangyu also raised his head. In the sight of the three, Li Tianlan's body shattered faster and faster. But he was still calm and silent. Under this kind of shattering, he had no pain, no sound, and no bloodstains. No bloodstains. Gu Hanzhan, whose face changed dramatically, took a step forward subconsciously. Snap! In the subtle sound, Li Tianlan's body disappeared completely. It was not a complete shattering disappearance. Instead, it suddenly disappeared in everyone's sight. The domain had completely dissipated. The sun shone down again. Wang Xiangxiao stared at the place where Li Tianlan had stood. There was no bloodstain or body there. Under the sunlight, there was only a single leaf that was still green, but had all of its water content sucked out, drifting down lightly. The leaf carried a faint and negligible sword intent, which made people feel desperate. The three young heavenly sons couldn't say a word for a while. Their hearts were extremely cold. They didn't speak. But someone spoke. It was so quiet and indifferent. You three. The voice sounded softly behind them, leisurely and quiet. Did you have fun? Bang! Accompanying this sound was an incomparably deep and loud heartbeat. The three young heavenly sons of Jianghu State looked back in disbelief. On a tree not far away in their sight, Li Tianlan stood there quietly, holding a branch in his hand. There was no madness in his eyes. Only tranquility. His clothes were neat and new, so clean that they seemed to have never been touched. Unscathed. Wang Xiangxiao opened his mouth, and a mouthful of blood gushed out of his throat. He choked and coughed. Li Tianlan didn't look at them. He just looked up at the sky quietly. In the dead silence on the number 3 stand, Li Tianlan's face was reflected on the big screen. Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun stared at that face in silence. Li Tianlan seemed to be looking at them. The sun shone down, warm and hot, bright and clear. That was the sky in Li Tianlan's eyes. It was clear, but there were still shadows. Chapter 381. Li Tianlan looked at the sky. The three young chosen ones looked at Li Tianlan. This was a dead, stiff, almost frozen picture. Large tracts of jungle were broken into powder, and the flat ground became a pool in the raging sword intent. There was still dust rising from the ruins of the collapsed teaching buildings and warehouses. It was a blur. Li Tianlan stood quietly on the top of a tree, bathing in the sun and holding a branch. The green branch seemed to have lost a leaf, but the other leaves were still warm, with the water stains left by the night rain and morning dew. They were very clean. The branch and the person were very clean. The fierce battle that affected everyone's mind and the eyes of the world seemed to have come to an end, but it also seemed to have just begun. He held the branch and stood casually on the top of the tree. It was clean and fresh, as if he was taking a walk in this battlefield. He looked at the sky. The three chosen ones, covered in dust and blood, looked at him. There was no anger, sorrow, or self-mockery in the silent and frozen picture. All the emotions seemed to be completely frozen with the blood. There was only dullness left. He stood at the peak of power, looked down on them, broke the rules, lost friendship, and did whatever it took to eliminate the threat in the future. In the end, he risked his life and was injured. When he should have been completely relaxed, he found that he just destroyed a fallen leaf, a sword intent, and an incarnation that the other party threw into the sky. What was his mood? Jianghu looked at Li Tianlan with a complicated expression. He was not unfamiliar with such a method, but he was absolutely not familiar with it. Li Tianlan, who was destroyed by them together, was not an incarnation. It was sword intent. It was the purest sword intent that belonged to Li Tianlan. The sword intent had been in their sight all the time. The sword intent did not deceive their eyes, but the pure sword intent twisted the void. The sword intent finally twisted into Li Tianlan's appearance in the void. It was an extremely powerful and pure sword intent. What the three of them saw was all an illusion after the distortion of the void. In fact, it was a fallen leaf and a sword intent. It was like a magic trick. A magic trick that only those at the peak of the invincible realm were qualified to play. Li Tianlan's combat capability was naturally no match for those at the peak of the invincible realm. But his vision, his knowledge, his thoughts, and even his will were close to the most mysterious and powerful domain. Wang Xiangxiao's path was just a prototype. Jiang Shangyu's road had just begun. But the road in front of Li Tianlan had already led to the highest place. He was standing on that path, moving forward. All of Jiang Shangyu's complacency completely disappeared. Looking at Li Tianlan in front of him, his dull eyes became dim and even a little desperate. Gu Hanzhan trembled all over. His trembling was extremely obvious, as if he was convulsing. He used all the strength in his body to hold the dagger that he had used to stare at the fallen leaf not long ago. The blade of the dagger trembled along with his arm, cutting through the air. His face was completely twisted. After a moment of sluggishness, his heart was filled with astonishment, disbelief, and disbelief. In the end, it turned into a burning jealousy. How could the remaining member of the Li family, an ant, have come this far? What did he rely on to reach this step? The vision of the peak invincible realm and the combat capability of the invincible realm. Why wasn't he the one who could do this? Who was Li Tianlan? What right does he have? Gu Hanzhan gritted his teeth and stared at Li Tianlan, who was unscathed. Thinking of the fierce battle just now, he suddenly felt that everything about him was a joke. His eyes became sinister with jealousy, and finally turned into a surging killing intent and a little timid resentment. Puff! Wang Xiangxiao spat out a mouthful of blood again. His eyes were already a little dizzy and blurred. But his will became more and more sober. The scenes of the battle just now replayed in his mind, and every scene seemed to be a merciless mockery of them. He didn't understand why Li Tianlan was so crazy, nor did he understand why the branch in his hand disappeared under Chan Moshua's sky-killing sword intent, nor did he understand why Li Tianlan had no sense at all. It turned out that the truth of everything was just because it was just a sword intent condensed by a fallen leaf. No matter how pure the sword intent was sword intent. Without life, it naturally had no thoughts and reason. The three young chosen ones of Jianghu state joined hands to fight against a fallen leaf. It was thrilling and soul-stirring, and they finally won. A fallen leaf. Such a beautiful story might have already spread all over the dark world, right? Wang Xianxia raised the corner of his mouth. He laughed. The chosen one of Beihai, who was destined to shoulder the Wang family of Beihai for the next few decades, trembled with laughter. His laughter was inexplicable and full of self-mockery. But he was not disappointed. Not at all. When Jianghu was a little desperate, and when Gu Hanzhan was full of jealousy, the helplessness and melancholy in Wang Shengxiao's eyes completely disappeared with the appearance of Li Tianlan. Flames flashed in his eyes, and eventually became a wildfire that burned everything. He, who was the most seriously injured, was the first to raise the firmament in his hand. The huge blade pointed at Li Tianlan from afar, and the fighting intent soared. At this moment, there was no timidity, jealousy, or loss in Wang Shengxiao's eyes, only firmness and madness. Li Tianlan withdrew his gaze from the sky and looked at Wang Shengxiao. Wang Shengxiao stood straight, holding the sword, and his figure was as straight as a javelin. I lost today. Wang Shengxiao's eyes became more and more frenzied. But his tone was calm and a little humble. I'm sincerely convinced. He took a step forward with his sword, looked at Li Tianlan and whispered, but the maneuver is not over. If you don't die today, I'm willing to chase after your back for many years to come. There was a flash of light in Li Tianlan's eyes. Wang Shengxiao's figure was reflected in his quiet and deep pupils, so clear. This was Wang Shengxiao. He lost the maneuver, became a laughingstock, and was seriously injured. But compared to Gu Hanzhan, who completely lost his composure, and Jianghu, who was in a mess, the chosen one of Beihai did not lose the bearing of the Wang family of Beihai after all. He still dared to fight and draw his sword. In the stands, Wang Tianzong's eyes gradually became calm. He looked at Wang Shengxiao's firm and crazy eyes on the screen, and the corners of his mouth lifted imperceptibly. He had expected this situation. In Lin En, he had already vaguely perceived the height of Li Tianlan's martial arts. But before the maneuver began, he really did not expect that there was such a means to dominate the battlefield with a green leaf. That was the domain belonging to the peak of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan's technique was very jerky, and there were too many loopholes. In the eyes of any invincible realm expert or even a half-step invincible realm expert, such a technique was ridiculous. But it also meant that Li Tianlan had found the way to the peak. A green leaf fought with 3 young chosen ones. Such an ending could be described as extremely miserable. But in his eyes, his son didn't lose in a bad way. At least, he did not lose his faith, and he still had the fighting desire in his heart. Martial arts was like climbing a mountain, crossing the sea, and ascending to the sky. Who could sing all the way? Failure was actually not terrible. It actually took more courage to admit failure and be willing to chase after the opponent's back. Wang Tianzong's palm stroked the famous sword. Listened to the sea beside him. His eyes gradually changed from calm to cold. It became cold. Li Tianlan stood on the treetop and slowly turned around. His movements were slow, but his every move affected everyone's nerves. His eyes swept over the sword in Wang Shengxiao's hand, ignored the sword energy on the blade, and finally stopped on Gu Hanzhan. Gu Hanzhan's expression was still distorted, and he even forgot to hide the jealousy deep in his eyes. Do you like to laugh? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and took the initiative to ask, so humorous? Gu Hanzhan froze for a moment, and his face turned purple in an instant. He recalled his wild and carefree laughter as he tore that green leaf apart. That was simply the most humiliating moment of his life. What did you say? Gu Hanzhan flew into a rage. Li Tianlan's eyes were still calm, and his tone was indifferent. Such a temperament is really a disgrace to the heavenly king heart. It also insults the 4 words of the young chosen ones. Kunlun City. Ha! It was impossible for his voice to reach the stands, but it easily fell into the ears of everyone present. Gu Hanzhan, who was in a mess, suddenly had red eyes. That was not the unyielding fighting desire like Wang Shengxiao's. Instead, it was a kind of anger because his scar had been opened. He instinctively took a step forward, but then stopped where he was. Kunlun City. Get into formation. His face was completely red, but he did not dare to do it himself. Instead, he roared. Everyone who participated in the maneuver had arrived at the scene. The sword energy in the final hit formation that Kunlun City had prepared for a long time was mighty. This was a sword formation without a so-called core. But without a core, it did not mean that there could not be a core when conditions permitted. Gu Yulan, the personal disciple of Gu Qianchuan and the founder of Jilei Peak, was standing in the formation at this time. Gu Yulan, who had not fully recovered from her injury, was pale, but she bit her lip tightly and raised the sword in her hand. In an instant, the killing formation, which was formed by more than 50 elites, exploded with a majestic sword intent. Li Tianlan slightly raised his eyebrows. His figure trembled gently on the branch. Without a sound, his entire figure continued to fade, and finally disappeared under the bright and beautiful sunlight. The sword energy of the final hit sword formation was surging and becoming more and more majestic. Gu Hanzhan suddenly turned around and glanced around. "Behind you!" Jianghu suddenly raised his voice. Gu Hanzhan quickly turned around. There was only sunlight, only the pool, only the sword formation, only Xianxia and Jianghu in his sight. "Behind you!" A cold chill instantly swept through Gu Hanzhan's whole body. He turned around again. The dense forest appeared in his sight, but Li Tianlan was still nowhere to be seen. A great danger seemed to be lurking behind him like a shadow, but he could not see anything. He was turning around. Still nothing. "What are you looking for?" When the voice sounded, a hand was placed on Gu Hanzhan's shoulder at the same time. All the hair on Gu Hanzhan's body stood on end. With a roar, the sword intent that had been accumulated all over his body instantly flew in all directions. But the hand on his shoulder was still stable. The palm slightly tightened. In the case of serious injury, a force that Gu Hanzhan could not resist directly pressed on his shoulder. Gu Hanzhan roared fiercely. Bang! His body directly knelt on the ground. Bang! In the dull sound, before Gu Hanzhan had time to feel humiliated, a foot directly kicked him in the back of his heart. Red blood gushed out of his mouth like a fountain. Gu Hanzhan's body directly flew dozens of meters away. Gu Hanzhan endured the pain and climbed up as fast as he could. His eyes were cold and gloomy. There was nothing in his sight. "Behind you!" In the shrill reminder, Gu Hanzhan reacted completely by instinct. He clenched the dagger and directly swept it backward. His body turned extremely fast, but he still did not see Li Tianlan. He only saw a hand. A hand clenched his arm and pulled it very gently. The severe pain made Gu Hanzhan roar suddenly. His physical strength was as fragile as a piece of paper in that hand. His arm was forcibly broken in the pull. The dagger in his hand fell out of control and was immediately caught by Li Tianlan. The blade flashed with cold light in the sun, with a dark red color. Without the slightest hesitation, Li Tianlan stabbed the dagger into Gu Hanzhan's back steadily. Blood splashed. The dagger was stabbed in and then pulled out violently. Li Tianlan kicked Gu Hanzhan out again. "Li Tianlan!" In pain and shame, Gu Hanzhan's whole face and even his voice became distorted. At this moment, he finally remembered a secret unique skill of the Li family. It was the legendary unique skill recorded in the invincible manual of Map of God of War. Night walking. This could be said to be the top but also the most difficult body movement to practice in the dark world. It was also an almost invincible unique skill. It was good at chasing and even better at close-range assassination. In the battle of the same realm, once night walking took the lead, the enemy could never see his position. Such a body movement seemed to take advantage of the blind spot and absolute speed. But in fact, night walking pursued instinct and the grasp of the details of the enemy's body. Instinct was the fastest. This was a kind of body movement that used instinct to always keep pace with the enemy's movements. When practiced to the peak, once he appeared behind the enemy in the battle, he would always be behind the enemy until the enemy died. Gu Hanzhan had the Heavenly King heart. At his peak, his will was absolutely focused. It could be said that he was the biggest nemesis of night walking. But now his mind was in a mess. Under Li Tianlan's attack, he had no power to fight back. Using the body movement that was most restrained by the Heavenly King heart to tease Gu Hanzhan was the greatest humiliation to Kunlun City and Gu Hanzhan. The dagger pierced Gu Hanzhan's body. Gu Hanzhan endured the sharp pain, tried to contract the muscles in his waist, and controlled the blood from gushing out. Li Tianlan stood in the sun with the dagger in his hand. He smiled softly. "You've played enough. Now it's my turn. In the final maneuver that day, the world should not only see his sword. They should also see the embarrassment of the other young heavenly sons in Jianghu state. There was still a lot of time. Li Tianlan only intended to play slowly. His eyes swept over Jiang Shangyu, Gu Hanzhan, and Wang Shengxiao. Wang Shengxiao still maintained the posture of the giant sword. Li Tianlan's eyes swept over. He slowly closed his eyes. Li Tianlan's pupils constricted quietly. In his perception, the moment Wang Shengxiao closed his eyes, he was no longer alive. Under the sun, he was like a statue of flesh and blood. His vitality was disappearing. But the sword energy around Wang Shengxiao was unprecedentedly violent. The sword energy kept rising. It surpassed the previous heaven-killing stroke and the heavenly sword in the domain of the three people's joint attack. He stood in silence, and there was only peace in him. His heart was calm, his breathing was steady, and his will was focused. Wang Shengxiao was completely immersed in the sword intent. Failure came first, and honor came later. In life, there were always occasions when one could not take a step back even if he had to give everything. Li Tianlan ignored Wang Shengxiao. Killing people's hearts. He couldn't kill people. But if there was a chance to completely destroy their minds, Li Tianlan would not hesitate to do so. He held the branch in one hand and casually threw the dagger to Gu Hanzhan with the other, saying expressionlessly, "Continue." It was not Gu Hanzhan who continued. As Li Tianlan's voice fell, Jiang Shangyu rushed up without hesitation. The so-called cooperation and the so-called future completely disappeared from Jiang Shangyu's mind at this moment. His essence, qi and spirit were completely concentrated. His will was focused, and his heart was pure. Li Tianlan said he would play slowly. But he did not want Li Tianlan to play slowly. In the entire Jianghu state, under the gaze of countless forces all over the world, Jiang Shangyu did not want Li Tianlan to press him to the ground and ravage him. He was not born in the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City, which were the super forces at the peak of martial arts, and he did not have the top inheritance. But he had his pride. Thousands of miles of starry sky. With Jiang Shangyu as the center, the sunlight in the nearby space dimmed instantly. The starlight lit up in pieces. Jiang Shangyu's figure stepped over the land and leaped into the sky. The whole earth shook with a loud bang. The faint starlight suddenly burst out. The stars were bright. The starlight that occupied the whole space attracted each other and turned into thunderbolts. The thunderbolts gathered on Jiang Shangyu's arm. Under the dazzling light, a large amount of thunderbolts condensed into a fist that was tens of meters long. Jiang Shangyu roared wildly, clenched the fist made of thunderbolts, and smashed it down hard. Li Tianlan's eyes were calm without any fluctuation. He looked at Jiang Shangyu, who was constantly accumulating power in the air. He watched the huge shadow of the huge fist that traversed tens of meters of space fall. The branch in his hand hung on the ground. He raised one hand. There was no starlight, no night, no thunderbolts, no sword energy. A sword was a sword. And a fist was a fist. His figure was extremely small under the shadow of the fist that was tens of meters long. But at this moment, Li Tianlan exuded a kind of momentum that could suppress everything. Under the shadow of the fist, he punched into the sky with the power of the sea. The air within a radius of 100 meters suddenly twisted along with his punch. The space exploded in the compression, with a harsh sonic boom. The flickering but seemingly endless starlight was extinguished in an instant. The sun fell again. It shone on the shadow of the fist made of thunderbolts in the void. Li Tianlan's punch directly hit the shadow of the fist. Boom! In the dull crash, a large area of land between Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu continued to crack. The flat ground continued to rise and fall with the appearance of the cracks. Smoke and dust rose, filled the sky, and rushed into the woods like a gust of wind. Blood gushed out of Jiang Shangyu's mouth and his arm. His whole body trembled violently, and his aura fluctuated constantly. Li Tianlan didn't move. Under the collision of the two huge forces, his clothes and hair didn't even lift a little bit. Jiang Shangyu gritted his teeth. The violent power twisted the air. There seemed to be a thick wall in front of him blocking his way. The incredible destructive force pressed on his whole body. His bones began to tear, and his muscles were completely deformed. In the space where he couldn't move an inch, he raised his other arm again. Another punch. Another vast starry sky. The starlight quietly lit up in the storm of power. Under the sun, the darkness came quietly. Gu Hanzhan, who managed to calm down, followed Xianxia and attacked with all his strength. Ninth Secluded Impasse. Eighth Supreme Sword Dance. Extinction of 5 elements. 3 elements final kill. Gu Hanzhan seemed to have become a sword energy ejector in an instant. The dense sword intent kept whistling out with the vibration of his body. A large number of sword wheels and whistling sword shadows all rushed into the pseudo-domain in an instant. They combined with the starry sky and assimilated with the darkness. The vast starry sky and the ninth secluded impasse blended with each other. But Wang Shengxiao's sword was missing. Wang Shengxiao still held his sword and closed his eyes. The sword qi gathered crazily and covered his entire body. The sword energy was getting stronger and stronger. A large area of space fluctuated around him, undulating like stormy waves. There seemed to be a sea in the air around Wang Shengxiao. The heavy sword firmament was lifted up little by little. It was extremely heavy. But he seemed to have forgotten everything around him. He didn't move or speak, and he didn't draw his sword. It was Gu Yulan who drew her sword. It was the final kill sword formation composed of more than 50 elites whose realm was at the peak of the ice-condensing realm. In the domain, the starlight lit up. On the edge of the woods, Gu Yulan, who had accumulated the sword intent of the final kill sword formation to the limit, suddenly let out an extremely high-pitched scream. The silver mask that she had always worn on her face directly exploded under the constantly gathering sword energy. Her long hair fluttered in the sword intent. In the whistling sword intent, everyone saw her line up. It was an extremely beautiful face, very seductive, but a little childish and cold. In the soaring sword intent, her figure went straight up into the sky, with the sword intent condensed by dozens of people and her own strongest blow. She held the sword with both hands and rushed straight to Li Tianlan. This sword seemed light, but it was extremely strange and fast. Gu Yulan's figure broke through the air. Her figure was like a goshawk. She held the sword with both hands, and the tip of the sword lit up with a blurry light. It was like thunder, flame, ice, flying snow and everything. All the light eventually became extremely fleeting. The light on the tip of the sword grew brighter and brighter. It seemed to be a sword that cut through the space. Wherever Gu Yulan passed, the whole space was fragmented and mottled, turning into a dark and undefeated color. She rushed into the pseudo-domain, into the darkness and starlight. Without hesitation. Behind Gu Yulan, more than 50 elites of the final kill sword formation fell to the ground. Dozens of remaining members of the 6 teams rushed to Li Tianlan at the same time. Everyone had used all their strength. The young heavenly sun, the majestic sword formation, and the scattered elites. Charge, all of you charge. Li Tianlan still stood where he was. The final kill sword formation made up for the heavenly sword. Everything seemed to begin to change toward the real domain again. Li Tianlan laughed. This domain tore apart one of his sword intent. Now that he was standing here, what was the meaning of this so-called domain? Gu Yulan stabbed directly at his chest with unparalleled sword light. Li Tianlan raised his palm again. He clenched his fist. He held the branch in his other hand. There was no sword intent. Just the palm. Just the power. But this time, he really did his best. Crack. There was a clear sound of breaking in the silent pseudo-domain. Li Tianlan's palm didn't seem to be fast, but it just appeared in front of Gu Yulan. The starlight and the pseudo-domain were constantly torn apart the moment he raised his palm. The sword light shone on Li Tianlan's calm and deep pupils. His eyes were so quiet. So gentle. But so majestic. Gu Yulan's body froze in the air. With the sword intent of dozens of people and the strongest blow, she came to Li Tianlan and tried her best to scream and stab forward, but the long sword could no longer move forward. Li Tianlan pinched the blade with one hand. The violent sword energy hit the power storm in Li Tianlan's palm and kept trembling, but it couldn't move forward at all. The sword light, the starlight, the pseudo-domain, and the power storm. At this moment, all the destructive forces collapsed around Li Tianlan, whistling and flying. Under the flickering light, he stood quietly, with his own general trend and peace. This was the picture he left to the world. But it was so desperate for the enemies who besieged him. Li Tianlan pinched the blade of Gu Yulan's sword and pulled it gently. He flicked his fingers. His fingers touched the edge of the sword, producing a crisp sound. The sword energy of the final hit sword formation was completely violent. The bright blade was completely broken in Li Tianlan's hands. The front end of the blade rushed to Gu Hanzhan and Xianxia with sharp sword energy and heavy power. Gu Yulan, holding the dagger, was swaying in the pseudo-domain. Li Tianlan's voice was very soft, but it was indescribably loud in the pseudo-domain. Goodbye. As he spoke, he closed his fingers. A punch. The broken pseudo-domain shattered in an instant. The power as vast as heaven and earth burst out under Li Tianlan's punch, like a mountain or a sea. The ground where Li Tianlan was completely collapsed. The pseudo-domain disappeared, the starlight disappeared, and the sword energy disappeared. There was no light between heaven and earth, only power. The heavy power completely blew away Gu Yulan, and at the same time, dozens of idle elites who besieged him were blown away. On the big screen of the Sky Academy, Gu Yulan, who bore the brunt, was torn into powder by this punch. One figure after another flew back under the raging tide of power. The majestic power shook the sky and never stopped. Countless people and countless swords danced chaotically in the tyrannical power. They gathered in one place and rushed out of the collapsed ground, bringing with them a rain of blood that filled the sky as they charged into the forest. The members who formed the final hit sword formation in the woods were directly rolled up. Nearly 100 elites and nearly 100 swords tumbled powerlessly in the air, and rushed to the depths of the woods for hundreds of meters. The incredible power swept all the way with people and swords. Countless trees in the entire forest collapsed and collapsed. Leaves and blood fluttered at the same time. In an instant, the entire dense forest was cleared out, leaving a straight passage of more than 200 meters long. Li Tianlan's figure floated in the air, expressionless. He was so quiet that he was almost nothingness. But under the sun, he floated quietly like an invincible devil in everyone's eyes. Jianghu and Gu Hanzhan, who were forced back by a broken sword, trembled at the same time. They looked at the branch in Li Tianlan's hand. They looked at the pure punch. Their eyes clearly showed that they were on the verge of collapsing. Everyone stared at this incredible punch in a daze. Even Gu Xingyun's eyes were full of astonishment. How? His tone was a little difficult. How is it possible? He knew that Li Tianlan had wind and thunder veins. So in the battle between him and Gu Qianchuan said that Li Tianlan's power was incredible, but he didn't care. But this punch had gone beyond the scope of great power, at least beyond the scope of wind and thunder veins. Can wind and thunder veins do this? Gu Xingyun suddenly turned his head and looked at Wang Tianzong subconsciously. I can't. Wang Tianzong nodded. His son, Wang Xianxiao, also had wind and thunder veins. But even if his wind and thunder veins evolved to the highest level, it was difficult to do this with pure power. Wang Xiangxiao's wind and thunder veins were difficult to achieve, whether it was strength or the speed that Li Tianlan approached Gu Hanzhan. In his impression, there was only one person in the invincible realm who could do this with one punch. His disciple, Di Jiang with double thunder veins. Li Tianlan also did this. What did this mean? His physique has improved. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and said faintly, "This is double wind and thunder veins." 2 chapters of about 8,000 words in a row. I want to ask for a monthly ticket. Ahem, brothers. Please support me crazily. The word crazily support is really good. Chapter 382. Today's second big chapter. There will be a bigger one at noon. Don't miss it. It was impossible. This was the first reaction in Gu Xingyun's mind. There was no saying that physique determined everything in the dark world, but there were indeed a few special phenomena that were truly unique in practicing martial arts. Martial arts was the combination of body and will. The heavenly king heart was the easiest to temper the firmest will. The wind and thunder veins were the easiest to break through the limit in physical strength. This was the most precious congenital condition. Dual wind and thunder veins? Gu Xingyun had never thought of this concept, let alone heard of it. Tribulation with dual wind veins went further and further in the chi-controlling realm. He didn't enter the ice-condensing realm, the fire-flaming realm, or the thunder-shocking realm. Finally, when he was the closest to the invincible realm, he directly slaughtered the supreme ninja of East Island. That was the most awe-inspiring king of shadow on the killer list. Di Jiang with dual thunder veins from the Wang family of Beihai had been in the world for less than 3 years, but he led the Tiannan Freedom Corps and shocked the whole dark world countless times. Before Tribulation and Di Jiang entered the Invincible Realm, they were enough to make experts of the Invincible Realm feel like facing a formidable enemy. The strongest features of the two were concentrated in Li Tianlan. Dual wind veins. Dual thunder veins. This was equivalent to the potential of 2 Wang Xianxia. How terrifying would the 4 meridians in Li Tianlan's body expand his potential? Absolute power, absolute speed. As long as Gu Xingyun thought about the future Li Tianlan, he felt a headache and even fear. The future was illusory. Gu Xingyun was very realistic. But in his current state, he really had to think about it. It could be predicted that in the next few years, his injury could not be fully recovered. And Gu Qianchuan did not have the strength to check and balance Li Tianlan. Li Shi had this ability, but Gu Xingyun did not dare to fully believe in her position. Without the suppression of absolute force, a few years later, when his injury recovered, how terrifying would Li Tianlan be? Gu Xingyun's body trembled instinctively. He didn't want to admit his fear, but he was more and more sad in his heart. He suddenly found that in this situation, when the future deadly threat of Kunlun City rose under his eyes, the only thing he could expect was Wang Tianzong's courage. The Sword Emperor held a sword in his hand, facing the eyes of the world, the 40,000 elites of the Border Praetorian Corps, and the Dongqing clan. Did he dare to kill Li Tianlan with his sword? It wasn't that he didn't dare. But he needed support. But Wang Tianzong was seriously injured and surrounded by the army of the Dongqing clan. The last thing Gu Xingyun could give Wang Tianzong today was support. The future of Zhongzhou State is going to be lively. Gu Xingyun lowered his head, and his hoarse voice was filled with unconcealable unwillingness and anger. He laughed at himself and said, "Dual wind and thunder veins. With a sword in hand, I believe I can pierce through the sky." "I believe it too." Wang Tianzong nodded and said calmly, "But he has no chance." Dongqing Wudi, who was sitting next to them, turned to look at Wang Tianzong with indifferent eyes. "What does Tianzong mean?" "Boring." Wang Tianzong shook his head. "The future of Zhongzhou State may be very exciting and lively. I don't think it has anything to do with Li Tianlan." He listened to the sea beside him and slowly stood up. The world could not see Wang Tianzong, but all the eyes in the stands were focused on Wang Tianzong in an instant. Below the viewing platform, the vast and mighty army of 40,000 suddenly stood still, their killing intent soaring into the sky. Dongqing Wudi was not angry or irritable. He just looked at Wang Tianzong quietly. His eyes were indifferent and determined. It was a determination that would not compromise in the slightest. Wang Tianzong smiled softly. He looked down at the neat and tidy army of 40,000 soldiers. There was a sea of people as far as the eye could see. "I won't kill him," Wang Tianzong whispered. "But he shouldn't have such brilliance. The Li family shouldn't have either." Dual wind and thunder veins? In Emperor Hall, Mount Dibbing. The conversation, which seemed to be chatting, negotiating, and confronting, was still going on. Summer Solstice saw the legendary night walking that only existed in the Invincible Manual. He saw Li Tianlan's punch, which could be said to be able to swallow mountains and rivers. On the screen, countless swords and figures were flying in the storm of power. Blood rushed into the woods with smoke and dust, and a passage hundreds of meters long appeared in the woods. In the punch full of death and destruction, Summer Solstice could only see power. The fierce power that could crush everything. "Is he handsome?" Qin Weibai's eyes were a little dazed. In her sight, Li Tianlan was floating in the air, expressionless. At this moment, there seemed to be only endless coldness and majesty all over his body. So familiar, so strange. The sword light, the crowd, the woods, and even heaven and earth were all shattered and dissipated under his punch. They were vulnerable. He stood quietly in the air, and everything around him seemed to be like ants. Qin Weibai smiled. Her delicate and dreamy face was full of happiness and happiness. Her eyebrows and eyes were curved. At this moment, Qin Weibai was no longer a cold goddess high above. She seemed to gather all the beauty and joy in the world invisibly. That was a smiling face that no one dared to look at. She finally saw what she wanted to see. She carefully pushed the chess pieces on the chessboard, and the result did not disappoint her. "Goodbye." Qin Weibai stood up with a soft smile. Summer Solstice froze for a moment and squinted at Qin Weibai. The maneuver is not over yet, she said. It's over. As early as the beginning, the moment Tianlan entered the maneuver area, it was over. Now, it's just that all accidents have been eliminated. Qin Weibai shook her head. Tianzong is still in the Sky Academy. Summer Solstice stared into Qin Weibai's eyes. Qin Weibai's smile slowly faded, and she finally said calmly, "So what?" She pointed to the stack of materials on the table. Summer Solstice had finished reading the materials. Qin Weibai didn't lie. This was a threat, the most direct, naked, and undisguised threat. "I'll give it to you," Qin Weibai said, then turned and walked out of Emperor Hall. Until this moment, she was really sure that everything had a result. A new era was coming. No force could suppress Li Tianlan and East Emperor Palace. The Wang family of Beihai couldn't. Neither could the Sword Emperor of Jianghu State. Summer Solstice didn't go through the materials on the table again, nor did she give it to Qin Weibai. Her eyes fell on the screen again. On the screen, Jiang Shangyu and Gu Hanzhan stood together. When all the elites were wiped out, the two tried to get close to Wang Xianxiao. Wang Xianxiao still stood quietly. The sharp sword energy around him became more and more violent. The thick and sticky sword intent filled every inch of space, completely wrapping Wang Xianxiao in the center. In the beginning, it was undulating like waves. Now, the sea-like sword energy was roaring like a tide. Gu Hanzhan and Jiang Shangyu tried to get close, but they couldn't get close to him in the sea-like sword intent. Gu Hanzhan seemed to realize something. His face changed, and he quickly opened his mouth and shouted. The thick, statue-like firmament moved slightly. Summer Solstice couldn't hear what Gu Hanzhan was saying, but she saw the sword edge of the shaking firmament. The low-key and almost unknown expert at the peak of the invincible realm sighed softly. She felt that her son had done a good job today. But she would not ignore one fact. That was, except for the sword intent that deceived all the people on the scene, Li Tianlan had not drawn his sword so far. Are you crazy? When he couldn't even get close to Wang Xianxiao, Gu Hanzhan finally realized what Wang Xianxiao was doing. His face turned a little pale in an instant. He looked at Wang Xianxiao, who was extremely quiet with his eyes closed. Gu Hanzhan couldn't believe it. Li Tianlan floated quietly in the air. More than half of the 6 teams were dead or injured. The maneuver had come to this point, and it was already the last moment. Li Tianlan's heart was calm and indifferent. His aura had always been stable at an optimal balance point, neither high nor low, without any ups and downs. He held the branch that had been broken at the beginning of the maneuver in his hand, and a few green branches and leaves trembled slightly. He was as illusory as a gust of wind, but he was as real as the sun in the sky, with tranquility and heat that could burn everything. He was motionless. He waited in silence. He waited for Wang Xianxiao's strongest blow, and for Gu Hanzhan and Jiang Shangyu to join hands. The whole world had seen his sword, and it should also see his strength. He didn't think about the so-called Sword Emperor of Jianghu State and the Sword God of Jianghu State. Now he was standing here, facing his opponents. He waited for his opponent's strongest blow, and then completely crushed all their counterattacks with the strongest sword. From today on, he was the chosen one. There was no prefix of young. There was no suffix of one. The chosen one was the chosen one. The sword was the sword, and martial arts was martial arts. He has more courage than you. Whether it's facing the enemy or finding your own path, you're far behind. Li Tianlan said in a flat tone. I'm just more sober and calm than him. Gu Hanzhan gritted his teeth and said coldly. His body was penetrated by Li Tianlan's sword. At this time, his whole body was tense, but the wound was getting worse, and blood had dyed his legs red. Under such circumstances, he still didn't quit the maneuver. Gu Hanzhan didn't think he lacked courage. Calm. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. Under the eyes of the world, your calmness is cowardice. You lost the maneuver, lost your courage, and lost your boldness. When the glory of Kunlun City is gone, your heavenly king heart is a joke. I don't think what he said is wrong. A voice suddenly sounded, interrupting Gu Hanzhan's words. Jiang Shangyu slowly took a step forward. What do you mean? Gu Hanzhan asked with a frown. He's very strong. Jiang Shangyu didn't look at Gu Hanzhan, but at Li Tianlan. None of us is his opponent. But no matter how strong he is, he's not invincible. We still have a chance to win. I don't care about this maneuver, but I have to get back the dignity and confidence that he broke. I don't want to give up my courage when I still have a chance to win. He glanced at Gu Hanzhan. Your conservatism may be calmness. But I think it's cowardice if you don't fight. I'll give you a chance. Li Tianlan's tone was calm, but it was full of absolute confidence. You will all be under my feet today. After today, my opponents will no longer be you. Arrogant. Gu Hanshan's face was livid. Jiang Shangyu didn't speak. He just took a deep look at Li Tianlan, suddenly laughed, and walked directly to Wang Shangxiao. His body became hazy, and a faint blue light enveloped his whole body. Jiang Shangyu's aura began to rise wildly, twisting the space and tearing the ground. His figure was extremely heavy. Why? Gu Hanzhan finally couldn't help asking. Jiang Shangyu's figure paused, and he said flatly, "For victory." He didn't care about Li Tianlan's future threat, because it had nothing to do with him. He was willing to pay the price he could. All of this was because of his most determined state of mind, and victory. The roaring sword energy around Wang Shangxiao suddenly calmed down completely. It was like the sea after a tsunami, calm and still, but more dangerous. Jiang Shangyu walked into the sword intent of Wang Shangxiao. His steps were extremely difficult, but he didn't flinch. The starlight illuminated the sword intent like the sea. The quiet and still sword energy began to shine. Gu Hanshan's face changed. He hesitated several times, but finally didn't move. He didn't want to pay a big price. In his opinion, both Wang Shangxiao and Jiang Shangyu were fools. The two fools stood side by side in the sword intent and starlight all over the sky. Wang Shangxiao, who had been silent for a long time, finally opened his eyes. He held the heavy sword of firmament with both hands. The heavy sword trembled in his hands. The sword energy all over the sky faded away, like a receding tide, and disappeared in an instant. Wang Shangxiao stood there. One man and one sword. It was simple. His momentum kept rising, but his essence, qi, and spirit began to slowly decline. In everyone's sight, Wang Shangxiao's short hair lost its luster, and eventually turned white at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was like a snowstorm falling on his head. But his aura was unprecedentedly calm and powerful. Wang Shangxiao laughed. With his white hair, his smile was bright. I have one more sword. Good sword. Li Tianlan's calm eyes finally became serious. But it's not enough. What about me? Jiang Shangyu suddenly asked. His essence, qi, and spirit were also weakening. His aura kept rising, as if he had broken through his limit in an instant. Martial arts cultivation, from the very beginning to climb toward the invincible realm, constantly breaking realms and becoming stronger, was to pursue more extreme destructive power. In the case that he couldn't break through for the time being, he seemed to have the extreme character of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Shangxiao took the opposite approach. So did Jiang Shangyu. They didn't break through realms. They were lowering their realms. After all, Jiang Shangyu's sacrifice was a little small. Wang Shangxiao was completely gambling. He took a big step back. From then on, he chased Li Tianlan's back. Under great pressure, he only had this sword. A sword that represented his whole thunder-shocking realm. He used the whole thunder-shocking realm as the price. This was destined to be the strongest sword that he had lowered his realm in his life. No matter whether he won or lost. This was all his fighting will. The road of martial arts was sailing against the current. Advancing a realm was as difficult as ascending to heaven. Wasn't retreating a realm as difficult as ascending to heaven? Wang Shangxiao held the hilt tightly and took a step forward. The distance between the two was less than 100 meters. Wang Shangxiao kept moving forward. His speed was getting faster and faster. The heavy firmament sword trembled crazily in his hand, producing a whistling sound that almost tore one's eardrums. The distance of 100 meters was covered in an instant. Wang Shangxiao turned into a bolt of lightning. This moment was the peak of his life. His mind was quiet. There was no victory or defeat, no future, no fetters. There was only his sword in his mind. His sword did not bring about lightning, nor did it bring about raging flames, nor did it bring about a gale. There was not even a sword chi. Everything disappeared on his heavy sword. A sword was a sword. Wang Xianxia suddenly felt extremely relaxed, and his essence, chi, and spirit seemed to be constantly sublimating. He didn't use the 6 paths of reincarnation of the Wang family of Beihai in the dark world, nor did he use any unique skill. This sword was just a straight thrust. He didn't think about anything, so he stabbed forward with indomitable will. Wang Xianxia followed him closely. In the end, Gu Hanzhan, who didn't choose to lower his realm, also rushed up. In silence, Wang Xiangxiao's sword came to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's body floated upward. His body kept rising higher and higher. The branch trembled in the high sky. Wang Xiangxiao was also rising. Boom! Without a sound, the entire training area was suddenly filled with a loud noise that shook the heavens and the earth. There was still no sword energy or sword light on the firmament. But as the sword went up, everything within a radius of hundreds of meters in the whole maneuver area suddenly rose. The broken tree trunks, the muddy pond, the scattered leaves, the flying dust, the ruins of the teaching block in the warehouse, and countless boulders flew up crazily under the sword. This required not only sword intent, but also speed and strength. Everything on the ground was rolled up and smashed toward Li Tianlan, covering the sky and earth. Wang Xiangxiao held the sword quietly and still stabbed forward. The simplest and most direct. In the stands, seeing this scene, a soft smile finally crossed Wang Xiangxiao's eyes. This seemingly ordinary sword was not a unique skill, but it was already better than a unique skill. With this sword alone, Wang Tianzong felt that he didn't come in vain. The sword light was getting faster and faster. Li Tianlan was getting higher and higher. The maneuver area was getting smaller and smaller. It was so small that the whole view of the maneuver area could be seen clearly, and the huge training ground and stands outside the maneuver area could be seen. Li Tianlan saw Xianxia, who had given up, rushing out of the sky in the woods. Her long sword rushed over with sharp sword light. She was also lowering her realm. Xianxia was desperate, gentle and decisive. The sun was still shining, but the sky was getting dark. Gu Hanzhan fully launched the 10th unique domain. Starlight lit up in the 10th unique domain. The heavy sword firmament passed through the darkness and stabbed straight forward in the starlight. Xianxia, who had broken out to the limit, rushed into the pseudo-domain at the same time, with unparalleled sword light, like a meteor cutting through the night sky. There were no other enemies in Li Tianlan's eyes. Gu Hanzhan didn't lower his realm. But in addition to Wang Xiangxiao and Jianghu, there was Xianxia, who was also lowering her realm. The 3 of them joined forces and became a private one. This blow completely surpassed the domain formed by the 3's previous strongest blow. Li Tianlan finally lifted the branch in his hand. Wang Xiangxiao's sword finally stabbed Li Tianlan. Everything happened in a second. In the blink of an eye, Wang Xiangxiao's extremely powerful aura suddenly fell to the bottom. But the sword intent that he had accumulated and compressed to the extreme, along with all his strength and physical strength, poured out in the most hysterical way at the same time in this second. The sword intent went away, and the sword energy surrounded the heavy sword firmament. The pseudo-domain and the starry sky shook at the same time. A black spot appeared high in the sky. The black spot expanded in an instant and became a huge vortex with a diameter of hundreds of meters in an instant. The vortex spun wildly. Endless sword chi with the most naked and crazy destructive aura poured down crazily. The sword energy penetrated the pseudo-domain and the space. The space of hundreds of meters was completely twisted and shattered, and the air was mottled. This straight stab seemed to really tear the sky. This was an all-out sword strike. At the cost of the entire thunder-shocking realm. After this sword strike, Wang Xiangxiao would return to the peak of the fire-flaming realm. But the power of this sword strike was infinitely close to the real combat capability of the invincible realm. The sword energy broke out endlessly, vast and mighty in the sky, and never stopped. The pseudo-domain began to compress desperately. The starlight diffused and gathered into the shadow of a fist. Xianxia, who was also lowering her realm and bursting out with all her strength, screamed and slashed at Li Tianlan. The sky became completely chaotic. Li Tianlan's body was stained with blood. But his expression was still calm and calm. He put the branch upright in front of him. It was as beautiful as raising a sword. In the mottled sky, his figure seemed to disappear in an instant. He was in everyone's line of sight, but he was as illusory as an illusion. But the branch in his hand, which had never had a sense of existence, became more real than ever. This was Li Tianlan's sword. His swordsmanship. The sword strike with all his strength was also the most perfect sword strike he had so far. This was the only comprehensive move in his swordsmanship that he could fully master. It was the combination of cutting the sky and breaking the sea and other sword intents. Wang Xiangxiao's sword converged everything and became a pure sword. But Li Tianlan's sword became heaven and earth at this moment. A crisp green leaf broke away from the branch and kept flying in the distorted pseudo-domain. The moment the pseudo-domain collapsed, heaven and earth seemed to close without reservation. The whole world kept shrinking in the flying green leaf, getting smaller and smaller, squeezing everyone's space of activity. The green leaf kept swaying in the shrinking space, getting bigger and bigger, almost occupying everyone's vision. The pattern of the leaf became clearer and clearer, with a flowing sword intent. The whole world was extremely quiet, as if only this leaf was left. In the silent darkness, the light that filled everyone's consciousness suddenly bloomed. The speed of the leaf suddenly accelerated, crazily flowing with a sword intent that contained nothingness but also everything. The world was unprecedentedly quiet. The mountains, rivers, seas, and the so-called majestic grandeur were all pulled down infinitely, so much so that everything seemed so illusory. Everything seemed to be frozen in the most illusory moment of the flying leaves until eternity. This sword strike was completely separated from the 24 moves of sword. This was a swordsmanship that had never appeared in the dark world. This was Li Tianlan's strongest move now. The eternal silence of mountains and rivers. The leaf passed through the quiet and shrinking world, suddenly speeding up in the seemingly far distance, with a touch of irresistible sword energy, real and illusory. Clang! The leaf hit the huge heavy sword of firmament. The dark and solid middle was torn by a fragile leaf. The whole heavy sword was full of cracks, and a leaf-shaped hole appeared on the tip of the sword. The leaf continued to drift, directly passing through Wang Xiangxiao's abdomen, penetrating Xianxia, shattering the sword wound on Gu Hanzhan, and finally rushed out of Wang Xiangxiao's body. Blood splashed, dripping with dark red blood. Li Tianlan, whose body was also stained with blood, shook his arm. In an instant, all the leaves on the branch in his hand flew up at the same time. The world seemed to compress the real and the illusory again, and the purest darkness instantly lit up. The world seemed to be shrinking. A big hand appeared in the shrinking world. The big hand opened. All the leaves of Li Tianlan hit the palm of the big hand one by one, and then they were casually crushed into powder by the big hand. A huge pressure pressed everyone down wildly from the sky and straight to the ground. Li Tianlan was pressed down. But his expression was still as calm as water. Under the forever silent world, he defeated Wang Xiangxiao, Jianghu, Gu Hanzhan, and Xianxia. In the end, the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, the sword emperor of Jianghu state, appeared in front of him and casually broke his strongest sword intent. Li Tianlan looked at Wang Tianzong indifferently. Wang Tianzong stood in front of the 4 young people behind him. He looked down at his palm. The sun fell on his hand, and a drop of blood gradually appeared in his palm, dreamy and magnificent. Wang Tianzong's eyes narrowed. Chapter 383. Wang Tianzong didn't hide anything. His palm appeared on the huge screen in front of the stand. A few green leaves that were still green but no longer sharp fell from his hand. He stared down at the drop of blood in his palm. His hand was full of sunlight. The sunlight shone in the blood, with dreamy crystal. Through the screen, everyone saw the blood in the sword emperor's hand. Everyone felt incredible. There was an uproar and shock. But after thinking about it carefully, no one knew what they were shocked about. The world was silent forever. The sword covered the world, and all the light turned into darkness. The world was silent and empty. Only a few green leaves drifted with sword intent, and finally hit Wang Tianzong's palm with a drop of blood. This was undoubtedly the most powerful peak sword move in the younger generation. What on earth should they be shocked about? Looking at Wang Tianzong's palm, everyone didn't know whether to be shocked by Li Tianlan's strength or to sigh that Wang Tianzong was too strong. The unprecedented sword brought out a drop of blood in Wang Tianzong's palm. It seemed to be glory, but also like humiliation. The shock in everyone's heart became complicated. A touch of sword intent surged in Wang Tianzong's palm. The sword intent wrapped. The drop of blood dripped from his fingers and fell on the green leaves under his feet. The small invisible wound in his palm had begun to heal. Wang Tianzong lowered his head and was silent for a long time. The entire maneuver area completely froze with his silence. Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong stood face to face. Wang Xianxia and Song Ci lay together. Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shangyu lay together. Both of them were in a coma. Li Tianlan didn't say a word. It wasn't that he didn't want to move, but he couldn't. Wang Tianzong's sword intent was condensed, but it was invisible and intangible, firmly locking him in place. It was indescribable and irresistible sword intent that could easily tear him apart. Li Tianlan stood quietly, restrained his sharpness, and even completely restrained his calmness and indifference. His body was like a piece of lifeless dead wood, looking a little fake. Wang Tianzong raised his head and looked at Li Tianlan with playful eyes. "Greetings, Your Majesty." Li Tianlan bowed slightly. The invisible and intangible sword intent bound everything around him. Li Tianlan didn't dare to bend too much. His eyes were looking at the ground as he bent over. In the face of absolute martial power, his talent and sword principle were unprecedentedly powerless. He couldn't even give the most respectful salute. Salutation was not free. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched violently. He did not reveal the slightest bit of anger, but the way he looked at the ground became extremely obscure. Interesting. Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan. His eyes were deep like the sea. Even though they were calm and gentle, they were still awe-inspiring. But it is still not enough, he continued. Li Tianlan straightened up and looked into Wang Tianzong's eyes. The two of them looked at each other for a moment. He moved his eyes away and looked at the four opponents who were protected by Wang Tianzong and were now in a coma. "For them it's enough," Li Tianlan said. "It's not enough for me." Wang Tianzong's voice was indifferent and clear. What was clear was his attitude. Li Tianlan's body tightened little by little. The air was filled with sword intent, but there was no killing intent. But Wang Tianzong's "not enough for me" was enough to explain everything. There was a sound of air breaking in the woods behind him. Three figures passed through the passage in the woods that was blasted out by Li Tianlan's punch at the fastest speed and finally stood between Wang Tianzong and Li Tianlan. Zhuang Huayang, Dongqing Wudi, and Cool Breeze, the director of the political department of the Sky Academy and the top assassin of Sai City. In terms of martial arts, these were just three experts who had not entered the invincible realm. But in terms of the general trend, these three people represented the academics, the giant group, and Sai City respectively on such an occasion. The three rushed over as soon as Wang Tianzong disappeared, and it was not until now that they arrived at the scene. Seeing Li Tianlan standing there safe and sound, the three almost breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. Wang Tianzong's eyebrows suddenly raised, like a long sword out of its sheath. He had been calm before, but at this moment, as he raised his eyebrows, Wang Tianzong suddenly became extremely strong and fierce. "Get out of the way," Wang Tianzong said blandly. "Your Majesty, why do you have to do this? The maneuver of the two academies is a stage for young people. Now the result is clear. Please respect the rules of the maneuver of the two academies, Your Majesty," Zhuang Huayang said seriously. After Li Tianlan's sword intent was torn apart. Before Wang Xianxia and others lowered their realms to attack. In that short period of time, Zhuang Huayang had received a call from the chief. What one hears may be false, but seeing is believing. Li Tianlan's combat capability and potential were now seen by everyone in public. For the academics, who had high hopes for Li Tianlan, they had to show a clear attitude of support at this time. "You can't stop me." Wang Tianzong took a step forward. The sword energy around Li Tianlan slowly shrank, and the three experts standing in front of Li Tianlan felt an overwhelming sense of oppression pouncing on them at the same time. Dongqing Wudi took a step forward. He was expressionless, but his eyes seemed to be burning with flames, fierce and resolute. "War?" he asked straightforwardly. On the grandstand in front of everyone, he mobilized 40,000 troops, and at the same time used the power of Wang Wantian, the new commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations, to restrain the high-level officials of the Eastern Theater of Operations. He had already said the consequences if Wang Tianzong dared to take action. Wang Tianzong dared to break the rules, and Dongqing Wudi dared to do whatever he could. As long as he touched Li Tianlan, it would be an endless war between the army headquarters and the Wang family of Beihai. That was Dongqing Wudi's overall situation. I won't kill him. Wang Tianzong took a deep look at Dongqing Wudi and said slowly, I just think he is more suitable to be an ordinary person. It's good for everyone. Dongqing Wudi moved forward again. He asked the same question in the same tone and content. War. Facing the strongest sword emperor in the dark world, Dongqing Wudi's attitude became more and more tough and aggressive. Wang Tianzong looked at his face. He observed for half a minute, and then suddenly laughed. Listen to the sea trembled slightly in his hand. Wang Tianzong's thumb pushed the hilt of the sword. The bright blade was unsheathed inch by inch. It's war, he said. Whether it was his eyes or his expression, there was no room for refusal. Not killing Li Tianlan was his biggest compromise and concession. But Wang Tianzong did not think it was necessary to preserve his combat capability. Li Tianlan was still alive. In such a war, how much justice could the Dongqing clan occupy? The pupils of the Dongqing clan member suddenly contracted. He saw the unchangeable determination in Wang Tianzong's eyes. But he also had reasons not to compromise. Li Tianlan had to be alive, and his martial arts could not be damaged at all. Otherwise, what was the point of the giant group's years of planning? Your Majesty, Sai City is only a few hundred miles away from the Wang family of Beihai. It's very close. Cool Breeze's voice was soft, as if he was reminding him, but his expression was also extremely determined. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud. They were the two top assassins known as the Double Walls of Sai City. They could get to where they were today not only by force. They also had ability. At least on such an occasion, Cool Breeze stood here, and he was qualified to represent the entire Sai City. Sai City was only a few hundred miles away from Beihai Province. This distance was within the shooting range of medium-range missiles. The top assassins of Sai City could cross this distance within a day. Cool Breeze's words were short, but the meaning was very meaningful and rich. Wang Tianzong was still laughing. The most impression that the Sword Emperor left to Jianghu State and the dark world was his calm and silent face, which made people not know what he was thinking. He was handsome when he smiled, with a unique charm of an old man, and looked very warm. But in Cool Breeze's eyes, this smile carried a kind of unspeakable danger. He was tense all over and was about to move. Wang Tianzong had already taken a step forward. The sword energy around Li Tianlan suddenly expanded and filled a straight line between them. In an instant, Cool Breeze only felt that there was a mountain on his body. As far as his eyes could see, the forest on the ground was constantly rising, and the sky and the scorching sun were suddenly far away. Messy smoke and dust rose up and fluttered down. Cool Breeze's vision was in a violent trance, and he noticed the sharp pain in his body. The endless sense of oppression squeezed him from all directions, and for a moment, it was extremely difficult for him to even move a little finger. Cool Breeze suddenly woke up. Heaven and earth were still heaven and earth. Never rising. Never far away. It was his body that fell. The sword intent surged. The heavy sword pressure was on him. When Wang Tianzong's foot fell, Cool Breeze's whole body was directly pressed into the ground. His bones and muscles were intact, but most of his body was pressed into the ground, leaving only his head on the ground. Cool Breeze opened his eyes in astonishment. He couldn't look up. In his sight, he could only see Wang Tianzong's shoes. I don't accept threats. Wang Tianzong looked down at Cool Breeze. He was really condescending. Cool Breeze's face turned red in an instant. He wanted to get angry, but Wang Tianzong's eyes had fallen directly on Li Tianlan. His eyes were deep, dangerous, and indifferent, like a goshawk staring at a hare. Your Majesty! Zhuang Huayang gritted his teeth. Get out! Wang Tianzong said lightly. He walked past Cool Breeze and didn't even look at Zhuang Huayang. Zhuang Huayang's eyes narrowed tightly. Anger? Humiliation? These were not the most important things. He was in his 70s and had experienced too many ups and downs in his life. A word "get out" was far from enough to make him lose his composure. What he felt most intuitively was Wang Tianzong's determination. This maneuver made the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City truly realize the infinite possibilities and great threats of Li Tianlan in the future. Wang Tianzong broke the rules, trampled on everything, ignored the general trend, and made it clear that he wanted to completely disable Li Tianlan. Dongqing Wudi's face, which had always been extremely calm, gradually twisted, became ferocious, and became crazy. The big screen in front of the stand was still on. Dongqing Wudi raised his hand. His palm was steady and determined. Today in Huiting, he was ready to bear all the consequences. So now he dared to do anything. Wang Tianzong was the best in the world. He dared to trample on the rules to disable Li Tianlan, but Dongqing Wudi did not believe that he dared to completely ignore Jianghu State and hurt a director of the decision-making committee. Wang Tianzong had made up his mind. He wanted war. Dongqing Wudi would give him war. In the sun, in the shadow of the woods, Dongqing Wudi suddenly closed his palm, clenched his fist and waved it hard. In front of the stand, the 40,000 iron-blooded elites of the Border Control Corps saw this scene clearly. This gesture only meant a military order in the Border Control Corps. All-out attack. At all costs. Major General Li Zhonghu of the Blood Battalion of the Border Control Corps suddenly roared at the top of his voice. The moment the 40,000 troops stood at attention, a hoarse roar that hurt their throats because it was too violent suddenly sounded, shaking the sky. Border Control Corps. Advance. Li Zhonghu of the Blood Battalion. Sun Mengran of the Pegasus Battalion. Guan Xianxia of the Wild Sand Battalion. Wu Junyu of the Black Dragon Battalion. The four highest generals present in the 40,000 troops sprinted at full speed. They took the lead. The military was in front. The soldiers were behind. The almost boundless army began to charge at the same time, without hesitation. The heavy footsteps were like muffled thunder that shook the Sky Academy one after another. They were irritable and fanatical. The 40,000 troops surged toward the maneuver area at the fastest speed. The crowd turned into a huge wave in an instant. The entire Sky Academy trembled and shook in the charge of the 40,000 troops. Dust was flying all over the sky. The high platform kept shaking. Everyone looked at the scene in front of them with a pale face. Looking at the most elite army of Jianghu State rushing forward without hesitation to the most powerful sword emperor of Jianghu State, Zhou Xuanji was stunned. They risked their lives. The fighter jets and helicopters that took off from the Sky Academy began to dive. One tank after another rushed out of the arsenal. The momentum was great. No compromise. No retreat. No rest until one of them died. Wang Tianzong clearly heard the charge and roar of the 40,000 troops in the Sky Academy, clearly felt the violent vibration of the earth, and clearly saw the fighter jets that began to dive here in the sky. Wang Tianzong suddenly felt grateful to the Samsara Palace. Thanks to the deep sea near the Samsara Palace. If it were him a few days ago, even if he could retreat today, it would be extremely difficult for him to deal with today's situation. In the silent and heavy deep sea, he brought up a 10,000-meter-long sword that went straight to the ninth heaven. That sword was enough to overturn the whole world. Logically speaking, he took another half a step forward in the pinnacle of his realm. So for him, Li Tianlan's sword intent was not enough. 40,000 troops were not enough. There were not enough fighter jets in the sky. The sword listened to the sea was slowly unsheathed in his hand. The wisps of sword energy were as heavy as mountains, surging like the sea, and as high as the sky. The sword energy was not strong. But it was perfect. It was natural. Li Tianlan stood in the center of the sword energy, as if to isolate himself from the whole world. There was no sound, no scenery, and no figure around. It was all light. Pure light. Endless light. The light shook gently. Li Tianlan, who had almost won the team maneuver with a perfect victory, suddenly burst out a lot of blood all over his body. His face turned pale in an instant. His straightened body seemed to be under immense pressure, and all the bones in his body were contracting. Li Tianlan's eyes were quiet and calm. The great pain was getting stronger and stronger. The heavy sword intent seemed to crush everything in him. He stood where he was with all his strength. He didn't retreat. He didn't bend down. If today was the end of his life, he would always maintain the most arrogant posture, give the world a memorable victory, and also give the world the most wonderful ending. Wang Tianzong felt Li Tianlan's pride and tenacity. He smiled gently. There was no mockery, no playfulness, no emotion, and no melancholy. It was just a pure smile. "It's useless," he said. "If I want to kill you, no one can stop me." I can stop you. Li Tianlan said softly. His voice was stable, but under the severe pain, his voice was a little weak and hoarse. Blood gushed out of his mouth. Li Tianlan looked at Wang Tianzong calmly. How old are you this year? Wang Tianzong froze for a moment. In my 50s. It's really half of my life. Li Tianlan asked and answered his own question. In the wildly rolling sword intent, Li Tianlan struggled to raise his hand. Copious amounts of fresh blood sprayed down as he raised his hand, and a bone-deep wound suddenly appeared on his arm. Li Tianlan's expression was quiet and almost numb. In the sprinkling of blood, he flicked his fingers. Puff! A dull and subtle sound sounded directly behind Wang Tianzong, with a few extremely suppressed muffled groans. Wang Tianzong turned around without scruples. His pupils instantly condensed. In his sight, Wang Xianxia, Xianxia, Jianghu, and Gu Hanzhan had woken up from a coma. As Li Tianlan flicked his fingers. In an instant, the illusory sword qi rushed out from various parts of their bodies, causing blood to blossom into the sky. Arms, legs, abdomens, eyes, noses, and mouths. Blood was gushing everywhere. Wang Xianxiao, who was the most seriously injured, directly fell to the bottom at the moment when the sword intent broke out, and his eyes became dim. There was a flash of hesitation in Wang Tianzong's eyes. He looked back at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's expression was still calm, but his eyes flashed with a ferocious, crazy, and somewhat hysterical grin. He saw the hesitation in Wang Tianzong's eyes. But he had no intention of negotiating at all. If these chips couldn't stop Wang Tianzong's attack, Wang Tianzong also couldn't stop the destructive sword energy that Li Tianlan had left in the bodies of Wang Xianxiao and the other three. His body was getting closer and closer. The four people who came to their senses kept twitching. The sword energy surged faster and faster, and the four people were all covered with blood. Wang Xianxiao gritted his teeth, and his eyes were in a trance and dim. Among the four, Gu Hanzhan, who should have been the most strong-willed, was the first to scream. Help me! Help me! Hurry up! Help me! He looked up and fell to the ground powerlessly, howling desperately. Fountains of blood rose in his eyes one after another. All of them were his own blood. Not bad. Wang Tianzong's eyes calmed down again. Is it enough? Li Tianlan said coldly. Not enough. Wang Tianzong lowered his eyelids and said indifferently. Li Tianlan laughed. He didn't think about Wang Tianzong's attitude, so Li Tianlan wouldn't be surprised by any of his attitudes. I will die. Li Tianlan said calmly, but the four of them one by one will go with me today. Wang Xianxiao is very good. Your Majesty, after he leaves, can you cultivate such an excellent son in more than 20 years? You seem to have forgotten one thing. Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan and smiled. The thing that saved your life 3 years ago came from the Wang family of Beihai. Have you forgotten? 3 years ago. Li Tianlan's eyes flashed. The thing that saved his life 3 years ago was the dragon vein of Jianghu state. But Wang Tianzong didn't mean that. If he went further. Immortality. Immortality potion. Li Tianlan glanced at the four young people behind Wang Tianzong and sneered slightly. For immortality? Your Majesty is really generous. One is enough. Wang Tianzong said coldly. Under such an injury, Xianxia wouldn't die. Maybe her martial arts would be destroyed, but the probability of death was not high. He now had an immortality, and he would give it to Wang Xianxiao. As for Gu Hanzhan and Jianghu, what did it have to do with him? You can't stop me. Wang Tianzong took another step forward. In the increasingly fierce sword energy, Li Tianlan suddenly laughed. Bring it on. Until they walked down Mount Dibbing. Qin Weibai never told Lin Fengting about her conversation with Summer Solstice. Lin Fengting was not more interested in this. He was more concerned about the result of the maneuver of Jianghu state. 1? Lin Fengting asked. 1. Qin Weibai nodded. Tianlan is very strong now, but I didn't see the end. Lin Fengting paused and looked at Qin Weibai. Aren't you worried? Of course. Qin Weibai smiled. I want to see the end too. But I'm afraid that Summer Solstice will lose her temper and refuse to compromise in front of me. Wang Tianzong will give in, but women are often unreasonable. If I don't stay there, she will have the idea of compromise. In this case, I'll take a step back. Lin Fengting vaguely guessed what the information in Qin Weibai's hand was. So Wang Tianzong's compromise was almost certain in his view. He just felt a little pity and a little lucky. His thoughts were so complicated that he didn't know what he was thinking. That information. Lin Fengting shook his head with some regret. I didn't expect to use it here. I didn't expect it either. Qin Weibai's eyes were shining with thinking. But it's good. Just in case, it's just right to use it here. She paused and said softly, I can't help him with everything. But that information can only be exchanged for a few months or half a year at most. Lin Fengting looked at Qin Weibai. Don't you think it's a pity? What about half a year later? Half a year later? Qin Weibai stretched herself. Her absolutely perfect body proportions seemed to have a layer of sacred light in the sun. Everything will be different then. Lin Fengting didn't speak. He just turned around quietly and looked at the Emperor Palace on the top of the mountain. Summer solstice appeared at the top of the Emperor Palace, quietly looking in the direction where Qin Weibai left. There was confusion, helplessness, and a little relief in her eyes. It was extremely complicated. After thinking about it, she sighed and took out her mobile phone to call Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong had already walked in front of Li Tianlan. The sword energy that covered all the nearby space under the flat surface completely condensed as he moved forward. The condensed sword intent floated above Li Tianlan's head, with an obvious sense of destruction. I gave you a chance. Wang Tianzong looked into Li Tianlan's eyes. Do you regret it? Li Tianlan looked up at the sword energy above his head. Wang Xianxia and the others were still surging with blood. Li Tianlan's eyes were a little regretful and unwilling, but they finally turned into calmness. If I don't die, it's no big deal to start all over again. He looked into Wang Tianzong's eyes and said blandly, even if I die, there must be someone to accompany me on the road to hell. Do it. Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan. In silence, the sword intent above Li Tianlan's head began to spin wildly. A phone suddenly rang. Wang Tianzong froze, and his eyes subconsciously softened. In his mobile phone, only this phone was set with a special ringtone. So he knew who it was without looking. He knew that the other party was also watching the maneuver at this time. Since she called at this time, it meant that Wang Tianzong had to answer it. Wang Tianzong took out his mobile phone. There was only one word on the note on the screen. Solstice. Wang Tianzong pressed the answer button and softly said hello. Tianzong, Li Tianlan can't be touched. Summer Solstice's voice came over the phone. Wang Tianzong uttered a short syllable. Fengting just took Qin Weibai to Mount Dibbing. Summer Solstice lowered her voice. Qin Weibai left something. It's related to the whole of Beihai. Li Tianlan really can't be touched. Otherwise, the consequences will be unimaginable. Tianzong, come back first. The consequences would be unimaginable. This was the second time Wang Tianzong had heard this sentence since he knew Summer Solstice. Shortly after he heard this sentence for the first time, the treason case of Jianghu State that had affected to this day took place in Jianghu State. Wang Tianzong silently hung up the phone. He didn't know what Qin Weibai left. But it was related to the whole of Beihai, and the consequences would be unimaginable. This had already given him a reason to restrain his killing intent. Enough. Wang Tianzong said calmly. The sword intent all over the sky disappeared in an instant. Li Tianlan withdrew his fingers. The four young masters behind Wang Tianzong suddenly stopped bleeding, and they were extremely weak. I'll remember this sword move first. Wang Tianzong said. The wind rose in the maneuver field. Wang Tianzong's figure gradually became transparent and faded in the sudden wind, and then disappeared completely. The figures of Wang Xiangxiao, Song Ci, Jiang Shangyu, and Gu Hanzhan also disappeared with Wang Tianzong. Everything happened in a few seconds. The bodies of Gu Hanzhan and Jiang Shangyu fell in front of Gu Xingyun in the air. Wang Tianzong did not appear. The majestic sword intent in the air crossed the sky and went all the way away. The 40,000 troops, who were about to rush into the maneuver area, stopped in front of the big screen. On the big screen, Wang Tianzong's figure disappeared. Li Tianlan still stood there quietly. Without that sword move there would be no more war. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time before he slowly moved his body. He walked forward for a distance and pulled cool breeze, whose whole body was pressed into the ground, out of the ground. It's good that you're all right. Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang got rid of the sword intent and moved freely. They came to Li Tianlan immediately. Li Tianlan nodded thoughtfully. Let's go out first, Dongqing Wudi said. They walked along the passage that Li Tianlan punched out, passed by blood and corpses along the way, and finally walked out of the forest. The big screen was still standing. Countless people looked at Li Tianlan on the screen with complicated eyes. The 40,000 troops had been neatly lined up outside the forest. The fighters in the air began to disperse. But the iron-blooded killing intent that filled the sky still remained. Li Tianlan looked at them quietly, at these elite troops who were most loyal to the Dongqing clan. They obeyed Dongqing Wudi's military orders. They were willing to die for the marshal in their hearts, and they were also willing to die for him. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth moved. He took a deep breath, raised his hand, and saluted. The 40,000 troops looked solemn and returned the salute at the same time. Li Tianlan, who was covered in blood, looked pale, but his spirit was abnormally abundant. Facing the vast and boundless phalanx in front of him, he bowed deeply. His soft but gentle voice echoed in everyone's ears. Thank you, everyone. Major General Li Zonghu of the Blood Battalion was stunned and subconsciously wanted to dodge. He looked up at Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi smiled and nodded slowly but firmly. Li Zonghu, who was still saluting, put down his arm. The next second, in the horrified eyes of countless people, the 40,000 troops. The 40,000 people standing in front of Li Tianlan knelt on one knee in front of the young man who bowed deeply in front of them. The scene was completely frozen. It was so restless, so solemn, so solemn. It was like taking an oath. The neat voices of 40,000 people rang through the sky and echoed in the Sky Academy for a long time. The Border Control Corps pays respect to Your Highness. Chapter 384. Everyone looked at this scene speechlessly. The entire 40,000 troops knelt down at the same time, like a surging tide, and instantly quieted down in front of Li Tianlan. 40,000 troops. Li Tianlan. One kneeled and the other bowed. In the lingering sound of shouting Your Highness, there was a suffocating power. No one dared to make irresponsible remarks about this seemingly normal but actually extremely abnormal scene. Gu Xingyun didn't dare either. Even if the most elite 40,000 troops looked more like the private army of the Dongqing clan at this time. Thinking of the Border Control Corps, everyone thought of a taboo, or at least a taboo name. Dongqing Corps. Both the Dongqing clan and the official denied this name. But wasn't the Dongqing Corps in this scene? Even more than the Dongqing Corps. The light of the big screen turned. The scene in the maneuver area disappeared. The scene of a dense army kneeling in front of Li Tianlan appeared on the big screen. In the field. Outside the field. Inside and outside Jianghu State. Countless people saw this scene. Compared with the little scar left on Wang Tianzong's palm by Li Tianlan's sword intent, the scene in front of them was really shocking. Because the meaning of this scene was too rich. The military super-wealthy family with a giant in Jianghu State, the most elite 40,000 troops among hundreds of thousands of troops, shouldering the responsibility of the Li family, the 22-year-old invincible realm combat capability. Sai City, the academics. Gu Xingyun, who was seriously injured, had left. Wang Tianzong, who still had killing intent. Everything was mixed together invisibly. Li Tianlan fully proved his potential today. The performance of Dongqing Wudi and the 40,000 troops also completely showed that the Dongqing clan had regarded Li Tianlan as its future core. The academics expressed a certain degree of support for Li Tianlan. Wang Tianzong's killing intent did not dissipate, but he suddenly left. Gu Xingyun did not make a move because of his injury, but it was obvious that he would not let Li Tianlan grow up. All the contradictions and conflicts appeared in front of people. And it was foreseeable that as Li Tianlan and the East Emperor Palace became stronger, such conflicts would continue to escalate. This was a vortex that could swallow Jianghu State. And Li Tianlan was standing in the center of the vortex at this time. There were still not many people who were optimistic about Li Tianlan, but more than half of those who really thought that Li Tianlan couldn't make it had disappeared. As the young governor of Sai City, he had the combat capability of the invincible realm, and he had the full support of the Dongqing clan and the inclination of the academics. Compared with the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City, Li Tianlan might still be relatively weak. But he no longer had any shortcomings. No one dared to say that Li Tianlan had no background. The Dongqing clan, Sai City, and even the academics would become powerful forces for him to break the Li family's imprisonment in the future. Li Tianlan slowly stood up straight. "Get up." His tone was calm. The 40,000 soldiers stood up and saluted him again. When they knelt down, they shouted, "Your Highness." Li Tianlan understood what Dongqing Wudi meant, so he knew very well what he should do. Withdraw from the Sky Academy first. The exercise is over. The maneuver was not over yet. But for Li Tianlan, the next maneuver was meaningless. The East Emperor Palace was already the first. The various exercises that followed were meaningless to many people. Today was the first day of the maneuver. For too many people, the real maneuver had actually ended. It ended like this. The 40,000 troops kept a neat formation and began to walk out of the Sky Academy. The fighter jets and helicopters in the sky slowly landed. The tanks and armored vehicles returned to the arsenal. The tense atmosphere gradually dissipated with the departure of the army. The sun was still shining. It was light and breezy. But all of this seemed to be the calm before the storm. Li Tianlan, the Wang family of Beihai, Kunlun City. They were still there. The contradiction would not disappear. Li Tianlan walked to the high platform in front of the grandstand. There was applause in the packed grandstand. Everyone was applauding. Those who saw Li Tianlan, those who were not optimistic about him, the people of the Wang family of Beihai, and even Gu Xingyun were applauding. No matter how they felt inside, there should be applause here. The applause was dedicated to the young man who walked up the platform step by step at a steady pace. He was 22 years old. Very young. But he was His Highness. Dongqing Hongguang was also applauding. The applause in Luojing, Zhongyuan, naturally could not reach the Sky Academy, and Li Tianlan could not hear it. But all of Dongqing Hongguang's applause fell into the ears of the old man opposite him. The old man was dressed in a purple tang suit. His white hair had just been dyed black. He was thin, and even his appearance was similar to Dongqing Hongguang's. However, compared with Dongqing Hongguang's usual gentleness and leisure, the old man was always tense, sitting there looking particularly majestic. He and Dongqing Hongguang had watched the maneuver of the two academies of Jianghu State together. At this time, when he heard the applause, his attitude was a little subtle. "How is it?" Dongqing Hongguang looked at the old man's subtle face and asked with a chuckle. "Not bad." The old man nodded. "Best," Dongqing Hongguang said without hesitation. The old man shook his head and seemed to be helpless. "You don't agree?" Dongqing Hongguang asked. "Does it make sense?" The old man shook his head, and his expression was a little complicated. "This was your choice back then. I didn't agree. But you didn't object." Dongqing Hongguang's expression became serious. He was the old patriarch of the Dongqing clan. But except for some new families, no one could have absolute ruling power in a big family. Even the patriarch was quite constrained in many aspects. The Dongqing clan was brave and loyal. They had their status today because generations of people exchanged their lives for it, and they were still willing to contribute to Jianghu State. There were several brothers and sisters in Dongqing Hongguang's generation, but most of them died on the battlefield. Only Dongqing Hongguang himself and the old man in purple in front of him survived until now. Dongqing Hongjian, Dongqing Hongguang's biological elder brother. Li Tianlan had told everyone how terrible his future would be with his performance. As Dongqing Hongguang's ideal core figure of the next generation, he definitely wanted to use all his strength and resources on Li Tianlan with the power of this maneuver, which required Dongqing Hongjian's approval. This attitude was extremely important. He did a good job. Dongqing Hongjian was silent for a while and nodded gently. This was recognition. But recognition was only for his performance. Dongqing Hongguang seemed to know what his elder brother was thinking. He smiled and said, "Don't worry, there's still a lot of time." Dongqing Hongjian pondered for a while, then nodded and said, "Let's wait and see." He stood up and slowly left the hall. President Li Huaqing was also applauding. Hua Qingfeng, the sect leader of Jianghu State's shadow sect, who personally protected him during this visit, had arranged the itinerary. Like Li Huaqing, he witnessed the maneuver. Looking at the president applauding, Hua Qingfeng also had a smile on his face. President, Hua Qingfeng whispered, I helped you decline the dinner of the president of Star State. Our private plane takes off at 8 o'clock. Okay, I got it. Li Huaqing turned around. With a smile on his face, his eyes were bright, and his mind seemed to be immersed in the maneuver just now. The president didn't know martial arts, but he could see the result. He was very satisfied with Li Tianlan. Very satisfied. Not bad. Li Huaqing suddenly laughed and didn't hide his mood at all. This was his 7th year as the president of Jianghu State. In another 3 years, Jianghu State would usher in a turbulent general election. Some undercurrents began to surge as early as last year and became more and more intense. Li Huaqing deserved to be in Jianghu State. In recent decades, among all the presidents, Li Huaqing was a very successful president. But he still hadn't completed the layout of the academics, which was undoubtedly a sore point for him. Li Tianlan's appearance seemed to be a good medicine. Especially from today on, his influence would not be limited to the special warfare system. This was what Li Huaqing wanted to see most. You've worked hard, Qingfeng. Li Huaqing glanced at Hua Qingfeng and said with a smile. Hua Qingfeng shook his head with a smile, turned around, and walked out of the room. Walking in the corridor of the White House, he thought for a moment and took out his phone again. The phone went directly back to Jianghu State and called a high-ranking official in the headquarters of Shadow Sect. Did you watch the final maneuver? Hua Qingfeng asked in a straightforward tone. Yes. A somewhat emotional voice sounded on the phone. A 22-year-old young highness. Tut-tut, among the younger generation, that person is probably really invincible. Find a chance to get in touch with him. Hua Qingfeng said. Cooperation? The person on the other end of the phone was a little surprised. Otherwise? Hua Qingfeng laughed. Do we have to be enemies with him because he is too powerful? There is no conflict of interest. Sword Emperor. On the phone, the person was a little hesitant. He actually wanted to cooperate with Li Tianlan. But Wang Tianzong's killing intent toward Li Tianlan was obvious. No one thought that he would give up his killing intent after answering a phone call. This time, Li Tianlan could end up with a minor injury, just because something was delayed. If he cooperated with Li Tianlan now, his future would be very difficult, and he would offend Wang Tianzong, Sword Emperor of Jianghu State. In the hearts of all the experts in Jianghu State, this was a mountain, an insurmountable peak. Those who dared to cooperate with Li Tianlan before a clear situation appeared were basically giants in Jianghu State who were not afraid of the revenge of Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai. Shadow Sect, which had almost no background, obviously did not have this confidence at present. It's okay. Hua Qingfeng's face was gloomy for a moment, but he still insisted on his opinion. He was very clear that those who dared to cooperate with Li Tianlan at this time were giants who were not afraid of revenge. But similarly, such giants, except for the Dongqing clan, would basically not fully support Li Tianlan. Most of what they did was just investment for the expected benefits. Today, Li Tianlan already had an absolutely strong background and strength. There was a whirlpool around him. But in Hua Qingfeng's view, it was also a great opportunity. According to the most basic maneuver process, Zhuang Huayang, the principal of the Sky Academy, accompanied Li Tianlan to the high platform in front of the stand. After making a very routine speech and praise, he announced that East Emperor Palace was the first place in the final team maneuver of the two academies. In fact, this was also equivalent to announcing that East Emperor Palace had become the first place in the total credits of the two academies. There was no suspense at all. But the maneuver was not over yet. Next, there were different maneuvers such as electronic intrusion, mechanical control, and one-on-one actual combat. If this year's team maneuver was a competition between the top young geniuses, then the next maneuver was the time for ordinary students to compete for credits and plot against each other. There were nearly 4,000 students in the two academies. The official end of the maneuver was August 10th. There were still 10 days. 10 days later, the two academies would announce the first place in the total credits of this year and the first place in various maneuvers. At the same time, the credits would be calculated, graduation ceremonies and commendation meetings would be held, and graduation medals and various awards would be awarded according to grades. At that time, the two academies would also hold something similar to a press conference. But there would be no reporters at the scene. In addition to the heavyweights of Kunlun City, the Ministry of National Defense, the Ministry of Security, and the General Staff, various departments of the military and the special warfare system would probably attend and choose the students they needed. So even if everyone knew that this year's maneuver of the two academies was actually over. But according to the process, today was actually just the beginning. But all of this, it had nothing to do with East Emperor Palace. On the last day after the maneuver, Li Tianlan only needed to send a representative to determine the future development direction of East Emperor Palace with the people of the Ministry of National Defense and Security, and what support Jianghu State would give to East Emperor Palace. His heart had flown to the battlefield in Snow Country, which was destined to be chaotic, and to the Samsara Palace that had collapsed. Tianlan, do you have anything to say? Zhuang Huayang finally finished what even he thought was nonsense and handed the microphone to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan took the microphone and looked at the full stands in front of him. His eyes were in a trance. He saw a lot of familiar people. Gu Xingyun, whose face was gloomy but forced a smile. Yi Fengqing, whose face was complicated. Li Beitian, who laughed and beamed with joy, sat in his wheelchair and talked as if there was no one else around. The members of East Emperor Palace surrounded him. Han Donglu, the founder of the Flourishing Age Fund, smiled and waved at him. Han Xinyan, who looked a little surprised. Dongqing Rushi, whose small face was full of colors, was clear and proud. Different people had different moods. But compared with the whole audience, the people he was familiar with were few. More people were destined to have more moods. Li Tianlan looked at them silently. There was another round of applause in the stands, and it became more and more enthusiastic. Everyone was applauding. Li Tianlan froze for a while and finally understood. Finally there was this day. He and the Li family could gradually not care about other people's thoughts. He stood here. There must be flowers and applause in front of him. Li Tianlan laughed. The Li family deserves to be in Jianghu State. I also deserve to be in the Li family. His voice was clear and indifferent. He still said some content implicitly. But everyone understood what he meant. The Li family deserves to be in Jianghu State. Of course, he was talking about the treason case many years ago. Li Tianlan paused and continued. In the dark world in the next 100 years, there are 3 words that are destined to be called great. Jianghu State. East Emperor Palace. Li Tianlan. He looked around at the audience. The greatest words. At this moment, Li Tianlan's heart was extremely calm. However, it was also filled with unparalleled arrogance. In the sun, his whole body was shining, and he looked like he was making threatening gestures. This was the Li family's first declaration to the public after many years of silence. It was also Li Tianlan's first declaration to Jianghu State. Jianghu State. East Emperor Palace. Li Tianlan. They would all be great. The applause rang out again. No matter whether they were willing or not, everyone was applauding hard. At this moment, Li Tianlan might not know that because of this maneuver, he had created countless records in the history of the Li family of the 2 academies. For the first time in all previous final maneuvers, he killed the game in advance and ended all suspense. In all previous final maneuvers, he was the youngest and the strongest. In all previous final maneuvers, he killed the most people and injured the most people. In all previous final maneuvers, he had the highest total credits. There were many more firsts. On this day, Li Tianlan, who was only 22 years old, stood here and swept away the joint efforts of several young chosen ones in Jianghu State with an absolutely invincible posture. He destroyed the cooperation of the 6 teams by himself. To be exact, he was alone. He shattered the whole era. That was the era of the future. The rise of the chosen ones. Was it the fortune of Jianghu State? Or the disaster of Jianghu State? Chapter 385. When he opened his eyes, the scorching sun on the horizon had gradually become dim. The afterglow of the setting sun shone through the window, rendering everything in the room more dazzling than when the sun was at its peak. Dusk enveloped everything in the outside world. The light was beautiful and brilliant, but with indescribable dilapidation and desolation. Xianxia lay on the bed, looking at the hazy and dazzling light outside the window. He was silent and didn't want to move. He seemed to have been injected with anesthetic. But the pain was still spreading in his body. The pain came from the inside and penetrated his skin from his internal organs. It was like sword intent, but it was extremely illusory. When it fell on his body, there was only coldness and destruction. The sharp pain dispelled the confusion after waking up from the coma. Xianxia felt the pain in his body. He finally realized who he was. Today was the final maneuver of the two academies. This was his most glorious moment. In front of the world, he had never exposed his heavenly king heart. But he showed his martial arts to everyone. He came from a family that had only risen in recent decades, and his martial arts strength was extremely ordinary. But now he was qualified to be on par with Gu Hanzhan and Wang Shangxiao. He would definitely enter the invincible realm in the future. He was also a young chosen one. He was brilliant today. That move of the starry sky amazed the entire Jianghu state. But similarly, he was a loser today. His light might not fade, but in front of the real chosen one, all his glory would be overshadowed. When people mentioned him in the future, they might still mention his shining brilliance today. But the brilliance was like the dusk outside the window, gorgeous but dilapidated. No matter how dazzling it was still dark at the end. That sword intent. The sword that made the world silent and empty. That was the eternal light. Xianxia's eyes gradually changed. All kinds of colors intertwined in his pupils, and eventually became complicated emotions. He quietly opened his eyes and lay on the bed, a little sluggish. The door was pushed open from the outside. Gu Xingyun, who was pale and struggling to support himself, slowly walked into the ward. Li Shi was beside him. Xianxia moved his body and struggled to sit up. Your health matters. Just lie down. Gu Xingyun smiled and waved his hand. Your injuries are not light, but they will not threaten your foundation. However, you must exercise less in the future. He paused for a moment before continuing, but there won't be much to do next. Yes. Xianxia responded and then said, Your Highness. Madam, how are Hanshan's injuries? It's the same weight as you. During this period of time, you can recuperate in the Sky Academy. When the drill is over, come back with me. Gu Xingyun looked at Xianxia with soft eyes, with an obvious appreciation. I've informed your father. He was going to come over, but something happened in the northern borderline that he had to deal with. At that time, I will personally send you back to the northern borderline. Thank you, Your Highness. Xianxia said respectfully. No need to thank me. Gu Xingyun shook his head and said with a smile, We're on the same side. You don't have to be so polite. You boy. Hurry to recuperate for me. Qingqing has always told me that she wants to travel to the northern borderline. After a while, I'll ask her to find you. You have to be a good tour guide for Qingqing. Don't let my daughter be wronged, okay? Xianxia froze for a moment. His eyes gradually showed a completely uncontrollable ecstasy, and his eyes subconsciously looked at Li Shi beside Gu Xingyun. Li Shi was expressionless, like a lifeless sculpture, but her eyes softened a little. She nodded slightly. Xianxia took a deep breath, but he could not hide the smile on his face in any case. The smile on his face kept expanding. In this state, Xianxia looked a little silly. Your Highness, don't worry. Qingqing will never be wronged in the northern borderline. Xianxia looked solemn and almost promised. His pale face was a little flushed with excitement, and his expression was solemn as if he was swearing. Gu Xingyun smiled gently, nodded, and said meaningfully, You're good. I'm very relieved to have Qingqing by your side. Xianxia scratched his head, and his smile became purer. You pay attention to rest. Gu Xingyun said, Don't think too much. Xianxia nodded. He hesitated a little but still said, Your Highness Li Tianlon. Don't worry. Gu Xingyun's figure paused. You are still young. For you, he is indeed very strong now. But 10 or 20 years later, looking back at today, you may feel that he just won a maneuver today. The one who can laugh to the end is the winner. Gu Xingyun's figure walked out of the ward. Xianxia looked at his and Li Shi's back with gloomy eyes, But he was thinking about Gu Xingyun's purpose of coming. This time, it seemed to be a routine, but there was too much information in it. Jiang Shangyu had to sort out all the things. He liked Li Qingqing. He really liked her, and he liked her for many years. Although Li Qingqing was still very young at that time. When Jiang Shangyu saw her for the first time, he was very sure that Li Qingqing should not stay in Kunlun City, which looked brilliant but hid too much filth. He knew Phoenix Pavilion, so he could roughly guess Li Qingqing's fate in the future. In the process of development, the Jiang family had always been quietly and carefully touching some taboos. For Kunlun City, the Jiang family knew it more deeply than most people. 3 years ago in Heaven Capital, when Gong Sun Qi and even the Dongqing clan were reminding Li Tianlan to be careful of Phoenix Pavilion. Even earlier, the Jiang family had already learned through special intelligence channels that Li Shi was going to Heaven Capital. This also made Jiang Shangyu more sure of some of Gu Xingyun's plans. Li Shi went to Heaven Capital secretly, not for national affairs, but for private affairs. But Li Tianlan's origin and Li Shi's past made Jiang Shangyu uncertain how far Li Shi would go. If Li Tianlan did not die, Li Qingqing was most likely the fatal poison prepared for Li Tianlan by Kunlun City. This was not Li Qingqing's destiny, but it was the destiny of Phoenix Pavilion. So in Heaven Capital, when Jiang Shangyu and Li Tianlan met for the first time, he had almost undisguised killing intent to Li Tianlan. At that time, he did it for a woman. Or a girl. Gu Xingyun and Li Shi left the ward. The sound of the door closing was heard. Jiang Shangyu lay quietly on the bed, thinking about all aspects. The cooperation between Gu Xingyun, Li Shi, Li Qingqing, Gu Hanzhan and Li Tianlan, the future of the 3000 world, the choice that the Jiang family had to face, the Wang family of Beihai, thousands of thoughts formed a rough outline in his mind. The outline was clear. But there were too many possibilities inside the outline. Too many possibilities means too many choices. So it was extremely complicated. Jiang Shangyu thought about it silently for a long time. His cell phone rang. Jiang Shangyu took out his mobile phone and pressed the answer button. "It's me." On the other end of the phone, the voice of Jiang Shan, the leader of Beijiang, sounded. "Dad." Jiang Shangyu called with a smile, but his eyes were a little complicated. The father and son were silent on the other side of the phone. "I'm sorry." After a long time, Jiang Shangyu whispered, "Today, I lost." "It doesn't matter." Jiang Shangyu smiled and said, "You did a good job. A temporary failure is nothing." Jiang Shangyu wanted to speak, but when the words reached his mouth, he swallowed them back. After the strike of lowering the realm, his strength was pushed from the stabilization phase of the Thundershocking realm to the level of just entering the Thundershocking realm. His body became weaker, but his state of mind became more and more perfect. He said yes with a smile and didn't say much. "Don't push yourself too hard." Jiang Shan sighed softly. Jiang Shangyu was not only his son, but also the greatest pride of his life. This son had never made him worry about him since he was a child. His forbearance, his wisdom, and his low-key even amazed Jiang Shan many times. He had always seen what Jiang Shangyu had been doing over the years, and even knew his plan. Today's final maneuver was the official beginning for the Li family and Li Tianlan. It was the same for Jiang Shangyu. He lost. But the plan would not be changed, let alone stopped. "It's okay." Jiang Shangyu's smile was light and breezy. He sat on the bed with his mobile phone. When he was about to continue to say something, he coughed violently. The cough came suddenly, but it was extremely violent. His whole body twitched violently with the cough, and the wounds on his body were also cracking. Thick blood flowed down his nostrils and fell on the quilt in front of him. Jiang Shan listened quietly, as silent as a dead man. After a long time, Jiang Shangyu breathed a sigh of relief and sat on the bed, panting violently. "Nosebleed again?" Jiang Shan asked. "No." Jiang Shangyu raised his head. His voice was a little hoarse, but his smile was extremely bright. "I'm really okay. Dad, don't worry about me. If it doesn't work, go back to Beijiang." Jiang Shan's voice was weak, bitter, and trembling. "Xiaoyu, you don't have to work so hard. I'm here in Beijiang, and no one dares to hurt you." Jiang Shangyu opened his eyes wide and looked at the ceiling above. There was no one here. so he didn't have to try hard to control his facial features. Strange, dark red blood flowed out of his nose, mouth, eyes and ears. He was still laughing. He was smiling with forbearance and determination. There used to be a very strong super-rich family in Jianghu state. He said softly, I can't tell how powerful they were. They couldn't compare with the Wang family of Beihai, but they were much stronger than the Jiang family. They had a deep foundation, a long history and a huge foundation. Such a rich family just made a wrong choice. He paused and continued. Maybe it wasn't a mistake. In the process they made a lot of mistakes. Dad, do you know what their biggest mistake was? What? Jiang Shan was a little stunned. Their biggest mistake was that they didn't leave a good enough descendant in the end. So all the glory turned into misery. The patriarch of the rich family died in a long-planned air crash. The patriarch's wife committed suicide. Countless industries were seized and auctioned, and the vassal families were fragmented. That family originally had descendants, but the most outstanding descendants were basically in prison. Some were sentenced to death, and some were sentenced to life imprisonment. Oh, I forgot. They did have outstanding descendants, but the woman who was supposed to be the most capable of supporting the mess was crazy. Completely crazy. She jumped from the highest place in Huiting and regarded herself as a bird. In the end, she fell and was smashed to pieces. That once glorious rich family, the whole family, even a dog, didn't have a good end in the end. He held the phone, his eyes were in a trance, and he whispered, From that time on, I knew that the pursuit of ultimate glory was the same as the pursuit of ultimate sin, a road of no return. So I understand what the Wang family of Beihai has done in recent years. I'm sure that if the Wang family of Beihai collapsed today, their end would be more tragic. As for our Jiang family, it may not be like this, but it's just because we are not as strong as them. Dad, if I don't fight and hide in Beijiang, after you retire, unless I'm willing to attach to a large group and be a puppet, how can I have a good end? In the current position of the Jiang family, if we don't climb up, we will fall into hell forever and never recover. Jiang Shan was silent and didn't know what to say for a moment. Jiang Shangyu's facial features were no longer bleeding. His spirit became more and more sluggish, but his voice became softer. Don't worry, Dad. I know what I'm doing. I've been preparing for many years. It's just the beginning to fight. I will lead the Jiang family to the position where we should exist. The struggle of the Jiang family for generations can't be in vain. Absolutely not. Jiang Shan smiled bitterly and didn't know what to say for a moment. Make some preparations. Jiang Shangyu whispered. Qingqing may go to Beijiang after a while. I just promised Gu Xingyun that I would be a tour guide. Qingcheng? Jiang Shan hesitated. Li Qingcheng? Jiang Shangyu said, Hey, Jiang Shan sneered. Doesn't Gu Hanzhan intend to make his daughter the new Phoenix Pavilion master? But it's normal for him to change his mind after seeing your performance today. He's going to use his daughter to force us to make a stand. It doesn't matter. Jiang Shangyu said calmly, in this situation, we have to show our attitude. If I can get Qingqing, I'm willing. She shouldn't stay in a place like Kunlun City. Jiang Shan said. Just as he was about to speak, there was a sudden knock on the door. The secretary walked into his office. On the phone, Jiang Shangyu vaguely heard a sentence. Secretary, the decision-making committee has urgent documents. He smiled, hung up the phone silently, and sighed a little tiredly. The Wang family of Beihai. The Li family. He thought silently and felt like he was standing in the middle of the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family. So he could understand the Wang family of Beihai and Wang Tianzong's determination to kill Li Tianlan even if he had to break the rules. That was the indescribable pressure and fear accumulated over hundreds of years of glory. Climbing to the peak was a road of no return. When it came to what to carry, Wang Tianzong was the one who carried the most. He could also understand the Li family's forbearance. This was the attitude they had to show when they had nothing. Li Honghe and the Li family were forbearance. Li Tianlan had to show a stronger side at some time. What about himself? Jiang Shangyu thought silently. The Jiang family was never at the peak, but it was not nothing. Wasn't this the most awkward position in the middle? In such a position, he had to endure something and carry something at the same time. The setting sun outside the window completely disappeared at the end of the sky. The night gradually covered the sky. The moment the light disappeared completely, Xianxia turned his head and looked out of the window. In the dim light of the night, there was a face without fanatical ambition but extremely persistent and firm. I finally wrote this chapter. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.